Chapter 949. My dear master, you seem to need help, don't you? Rin moved closer and gently stroked the part where the huge body had been cut in half. It had to be said that the power of Michael's last attack was indeed worthy of his title as the Lord of Light. Even a body of steel that was blessed with countless defensive spells could not withstand it at all. If it were anyone else, they might not be able to escape the fate of dying together with Michael. But it was a pity that Zhang Cheng had only used the projection of his consciousness. No matter how much damage this body was damaged, it would not have the slightest effect on the main body. He did not even care about the extent of damage to his body. He raised the only arm that could still move and pointed at the metal coffin that was abandoned in the corner. "Open that for me." "As you wish." Rin did not say a word and directly walked over to the heavy metal coffin and dragged it back. But just as she was about to say something, Zhang Cheng grabbed the coffin and used his strong metal hand to crush it with a bang. A golden ball the size of an adult's fist was found inside. The surging energy emitted from it immediately made the surrounding demons feel a strong sense of discomfort. As the Queen of Succubus, Rin did not say a word. She quickly retreated while screaming and cursing. "Ah, damn it! What the hell is this?" This is the heart left behind by the true owner of heaven. Look how strong, how beautiful, and how tenacious it is. Even after thousands of years, it still retains enough energy to destroy a city. Zhang Cheng commented meaningfully. "Master, do you need me to bring it back?" Adam appeared silently at the side and asked expressionlessly. Zhang Cheng smiled and shook his head. "No, there's no need. Just detonate it here. Didn't heaven claim to be the kingdom of light? Then let it be destroyed in the endless strong light. I'll give you an hour to retreat. After an hour, this place that is regarded as the highest place of worship by the angels will disappear forever. As for the rest, I'll leave it for you to slowly clean up. You're really a generous and merciful demon king. I think all the demons in hell will be grateful for your decision. I believe there will be an army of fallen angels in hell after we take over heaven." Akima bowed deeply. This was because the so-called slow cleaning was actually waiting for the last resistance to be defeated, allowing the demons to slaughter the residents of heaven and scrupulously to vent the anger, desire, brutality, and all kinds of evil thoughts in their hearts. To put it bluntly, it was equivalent to the American Westward Movement, the genocide of the white people against the Native Americans. But this time, the demons didn't just want land and wealth. They also wanted to plunder more high-quality souls. Through killing, threatening, torturing, and other means, they forced the residents of heaven to fall into darkness and then took them under their command to expand their strength. However, the demons were not like the white people in Europe and America who wanted to build a monument to their chastity. They tried to use the power of public opinion and propaganda to beautify their primitive, barbaric, and brutal behavior. On the contrary, the demons would not waste time on these meaningless actions. They preached blatant evil from the beginning. Similarly, they would not deliberately build a so-called protection zone for the natives after occupying the best land and rear them like livestock in it in the name of preserving multiculturalism. From time to time, they would bring their descendants to visit it as if they were going to the zoo to see gorillas. It was foreseeable that heaven would become a scorched land for a long time. Unless the angels were completely extinct, the massacre would never stop. Eliminate the roots. This was the gene that was branded in the deepest part of the demons' souls. An hour was not long, and it passed in the blink of an eye. Under the leadership of the demon army's upper echelons, most of the demons had passed through the portal and returned to the front line. They planned to launch a devastating battle and completely trample on these overconfident birdmen. At this point in the war, there was not much suspense. What would follow would inevitably be a one-sided massacre. Zhangqing obviously had no interest in this unchallenging game. He directly injected the last trace of dark energy in his body into the shockingly powerful heart. Instantly, the entire surface of the golden sphere was covered with dense cracks, one after another. The next second, asterisk boom! Asterisk, a dazzling white light directly enveloped the entire city under their feet. The violent shock wave destroyed everything at an unimaginable speed. Whether it was the buildings, creatures, or the golden pillar that stood in the central square that symbolized order, all of them disappeared without a trace. By the time the light dimmed, the city amongst the clouds had disappeared from the map, and even the land within thousands of kilometers had turned into nothingness. Space torn by the energy storm could be seen everywhere, as well as cracks that revealed a strange aura. With the destruction of Heaven's capital, several archangels were killed, and even the Lord of Light, Michael, was dead. The morale of the angel army at the front line suddenly fell to the bottom, and they were directly crushed by the demon army's all-out attack. Hundreds of thousands of angels were killed, and more because of the collapse of their faith. They changed from white wings to black wings and joined the demon army's fallen angel army and began to wantonly destroy their former homeland. But none of this had anything to do with Zhang Cheng. When a metal body was disintegrated into tiny particles by the light of destruction, his consciousness had already returned to his body. He pushed the door open and walked out of the room, sitting on the sofa in the living room, drinking an iced drink while watching a soap opera on TV. Before he could enjoy a moment of peace, Yvette, who reeked of alcohol, pushed the door open and barged in. She was wearing a sexy low-cut, backless evening gown. There were many red strawberries densely planted on the left side of her neck, and the black stockings on her legs were also torn to pieces. She sat on the sofa and said in a self-deprecating tone, "According to what you said, I successfully seduced that fat pig, and I also used a small camera to record the whole process. But it's best that it's only this time, or else next time I may not be able to bear the disgust," and directly smash his lower body. Bang! Yvette casually threw a small memory card on the table. "Well done. Next, we can use this little thing to threaten him." Remember, for men with marriages and families, once they are caught cheating, it often means that they may lose more than half of their assets. They would rather risk going to prison and become an accomplice of criminals than tell the truth to their wives. This world is made up of countless lies and deceit, and the so-called honesty and integrity do not exist from the beginning. The only difference is that some guys' deceit skills are terrible and can be distinguished at a glance, and some are more brilliant and can perform until they enter the coffin. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 950. *T. What you just said reminded me of the devil in the Bible who seduced mortals into depravity. Yvette rolled her eyes in annoyance, picked up the half-empty iced drink on the table, raised her head, and gulped it down. Perhaps the cold feeling slightly dispelled the side effects of the alcohol, or perhaps the large amount of drink went into her stomach and diluted the remaining alcohol. All in all, she became sober after drinking the drink. She stared at him and asked, "Why did you teach me this? If it's like what you said before, it's to repay me for giving you an insignificant towel. Then a few $1,000,000 should be enough." "Oh, what do you think I'm doing this for?" Zhang Cheng asked with a smile. Since there were still a few months before Adam completed the first step of the plan, he felt that he should continue his training game and cultivate an originally kind-hearted girl into a black widow who would do anything for wealth and power. "At the beginning, I thought you wanted to F***CK me, but now it seems that you don't seem to be interested in women. So I feel very confused and can't figure out the motive behind all this." There was no doubt that Yvette was not the kind of girl with big boobs and no brains. She maintained considerable vigilance from the beginning to the end. After all, she was born in the poor neighborhood. If she didn't have a few tricks up her sleeve, she would have become the plaything of those gangsters. Not only would she be infected with all kinds of bad habits and drugs, but she would also be forced to do special service work like standing on the street. In fact, the most popular takeout service in the poor neighborhood of Chicago was a black man bringing his girlfriend to deliver food to the door. As for etiquette, justice, integrity, and shame, these scum didn't care. For them, as long as they had money to buy drugs and food every day, it didn't matter even if their mother went out to work in the special service industry. The so-called thrilling love in Hollywood blockbusters could not exist in the lower class of the United States. Maybe you won't believe it, but I actually don't have any motive. I'm just a bit bored and want to find some fun for myself. That's all. Zhang Cheng said as he stood up and took out a bottle of drink from the fridge. Find some fun? Yvette frowned subconsciously. Don't tell me you're a rich man who likes to find excitement. Zhang Cheng shrugged nonchalantly. Are you doubting my wealth and identity? Yvette, shouldn't I be suspicious? Don't forget that you single-handedly killed more than 20 gunmen, and you were completely unharmed. Well, it seems that I need to prove myself to dispel your suspicions. With that said, Zhang Cheng picked up a laptop on the table and opened one of the legal accounts as fast as he could. He quickly entered the account password and finally hit the enter key. Huh! Accompanied by the crisp sound of the keyboard, a string of numbers appeared on the screen, enough to make most ordinary people's breathing quicken and heartbeat quicken. WTF? Yvette cursed, her face full of disbelief. How do you feel? Now, are you still worried that I have ulterior motives towards you? Zhang Cheng's tone revealed a strong sense of ridicule. In this country where capital was king, there was no problem that money could not solve. If there was, it could only prove that you did not have enough money and did not master the important technology and resources that were regarded as the lifeline of the country. Therefore, over time, under the subtle influence of the media, Americans began to believe that the rich were often more trustworthy than the poor and had a higher moral standard. At the very least, they did not have to worry that the rich would suddenly pull out a gun and rob them of all their belongings. But interestingly, they could not understand that many times the real bandits were precisely these capitalists. It was just that the capitalists had long used their deep involvement in elections and the famous lobbying bill to achieve a feat that many criminals could never achieve in their lifetime, and that was legal robbery. Especially in the financial field, where information was seriously asymmetrical, those ordinary investors simply could not compete with the capitalists. Almost every financial crisis was followed by a tragic massacre. Countless families went bankrupt as a result, and more people became homeless on the streets. You're less than 30 years old, right? Where did you get so much money? After a brief shock, Yvette immediately couldn't help but ask. I have a hotel entertainment center with a good income that can earn about $400 million a year. I also have a mother whose company has just completed the listing and whose net worth is more than 30 billion US dollars. Money is just a string of meaningless numbers to me. What I'm really interested in is what money means to ordinary people like you who live at the bottom of society and what kind of changes it can bring. Although when Zhang Cheng said this, he did not use any magic that affected the mind, but the effect was not much worse than using magic. It was like if an ordinary person kept talking about all kinds of principles, you would be 100% bored. But if it was a billionaire, then his words would be regarded as a classic. Even if it was wrong, countless people would follow and even use it as a life goal and motto. After all, in this world, 99% of people did not have the ability to distinguish at all. They were just pawns manipulated by the media. For example, for a long time, the success study that was touted for a long time was essentially worthless garbage. It would only constantly repeat the process of billionaires getting rich, talking about how many setbacks they experienced and finally persevered to become a winner in life. It would never tell you how to earn your first bucket of startup capital. Because for most billionaires, their first bucket of startup capital was either obtained from rich parents or relatives, or it was simply a coincidence that could not be replicated, or they used some dirty tricks. In short, there were never two identical successful cases in the world. All success was full of all kinds of accidents and coincidences, and it was impossible to use them as a reference. But Yvette did not understand this. She only felt that she was blessed by the goddess of luck. She asked in an extremely excited tone, "You will help me become rich. Eventually enter the upper class, right?" No. I think you misunderstood something. Zhang Cheng stretched out a finger and gently shook it in front of her. I will only give you advice, and then you decide how to implement it. So whether you can become rich and enter the upper class does not actually depend on me, but on you. The biggest fun of this game is that human emotions are complex and changeable, and it is easy to be tempted and disturbed. In addition, I suggest that you take a shower immediately and go back to your room to sleep. Tomorrow you may face some of the ugliest parts of human nature, so be mentally prepared. Also, buy a female taser Maybe it will come in handy. Chapter 951. Athens, located at the southern tip of the Balkan Peninsula, was the capital and largest city of the Hellenic Republic. It had a population of nearly 4 million, and its recorded history was as long as 3,000 years. It was known as the cradle of Western civilization. However, most people did not know that in addition to this well-known information, Athens was also the venue for the joint meeting of the Underground World Supreme Council. Today, the members of the Supreme Council from all over the world, as well as the various regional supernatural organizations that cooperated with them, gathered in a hotel controlled by the Ancient Sorcerers Association. They were having a serious, intense argument. As for the content, it was naturally the war that hell conquered heaven not long ago. In particular, the angels scattered in human society immediately informed the humans when they learned that their hometown had fallen and tried to obtain a protection agreement to ensure that they would not become the hunting targets of the demons and demon worshippers. Most importantly, the destruction of heaven meant that the stable situation of the three parties restraining each other had collapsed. What the Supreme Council would face next was an army of demons without any worries. Once a full-scale invasion broke out, the entire Earth would probably fall in less than a month. Among them, the war weapons developed by the ordinary people, such as airplanes, cannons, missiles, nuclear weapons, and so on, were powerful enough to cause considerable damage to the demons. However, the problem was that ordinary people did not have any magic resistance. Perhaps with a little charm, control magic, or the promise of an unimaginably long lifespan, status, and privileges to the higher-ups, those greedy fellows would definitely not hesitate to betray the interests of their compatriots. These weapons would also become the death knell of the underground world. Without a doubt, these old fellows who were used to maintaining the peace finally felt threatened. An extremely strong sense of crisis shrouded the hearts of everyone who attended the meeting. It must be noted that the last full-scale war had happened thousands of years ago, and at that time, there were many powerful gods involved. But this time, the gods had long fallen into a deep sleep and showed no signs of waking up. However, hell had destroyed heaven, and it would definitely become more difficult to deal with after a little adjustment. Silence. Terrifying silence. After a young female angel described the current bad situation, the entire venue fell into a dead silence. Some of the counselors, who were usually high and mighty, had gloomy expressions on their faces. Some were exchanging glances with each other, and some were secretly putting their hands into their pockets, holding tightly onto the invitation letters they had received in the past 2 days. Their eyes were shining with a strange light, and no one knew what they were thinking. Just like when facing invaders, some people would choose to do their best to resist, but more people would choose to surrender and live their lives honestly. Some would even choose to join the invaders and become their accomplices in exchange for power, status, and wealth. Would the demons of hell destroy the human world? No, of course not. What they wanted to do was to conquer the human world and turn the entire earth into a huge and chaotic breeding ground, so that it would provide an endless supply of evil souls. Therefore, in the eyes of some people, going to hell was not an unacceptable thing. After a full 10 minutes, the president of the European Supreme Council coughed slightly and said in a slightly heavy tone, "I understand. This news is quite bad for us. But the most important thing now was to confirm the demons' plans. Send a group of envoys. We need to negotiate." Agreed. Let's figure out what the demons want to do first, then we can decide how to deal with it. Cosmo took the initiative to agree. Although he was secretly glad that he had signed a contract with the Demon King of Hell early on, he did not show it on his face at all. Then who will be the emissary? I'm not sure if the demons will directly kill the emissary if they really decide to invade the human world. Another president pursed his lips and asked the sharpest question. Since ancient times, being an emissary had been extremely risky. Although it was said that 2 countries do not kill emissaries was better than anything else, in fact, there were many people who broke this rule. If humans were like this, then the demons who worshiped destruction, killing, destruction, and releasing their desires to their heart's content were even more so. I think drawing lots is a good choice, and it's very fair. If that region is chosen, then that region will send at least 5 counselors to hell to be in charge of this dangerous negotiation. Cosmo casually gave a seemingly reasonable suggestion. I agree with drawing lots. It's indeed very fair. Then let's draw lots. After unanimous vote, several Supreme Counselors got up and went to the center of the venue. They reached into a small metal box and took out a pale yellow strip-shaped object. Only the South American president drew a silver strip-shaped object. Without asking, it was obvious that he had won the jackpot and was about to be in charge of negotiating with the demons of hell. A cold expression appeared on his old face. At the same time, the members of the South American Supreme Council all stood up from their chairs without exception and stared at their own president. Congratulations, my dear old friend. The burden of saving the human world now rests on your shoulders. Cosmo's eyes betrayed his undisguised glee as he spoke these polite words. That's right. He was gloating. There had always been friction between the North American Supreme Council and the South American Supreme Council. Although it was not to the extent of a direct confrontation, there were many small moves in private. Now that his old rival was about to be unlucky, he naturally felt a sense of joy in both body and mind. The president of South America glared at the other party coldly and left with his men. It seemed that he planned to draw lots when he went back and gather 5 unlucky fellows to complete this extremely dangerous mission. Watching these people leave, Faust came behind Lafren and said in a low voice, "Come to my room later. I have something important to discuss with you." "What is it? Don't tell me you plan to go to hell," Lafren asked without looking back. "No, of course not. I'm not so stupid as to confront the unprecedentedly powerful Devil Legion. I just recently received interesting information. In the distant Indian subcontinent, someone found an entrance to a mysterious space. It may be a fragment world, or it may be the entrance to some divine kingdom. It sounds very valuable. But the problem is that we still have an important ally who is not here. Are you sure you want to leave him behind and act alone?" We didn't leave him behind on purpose. He didn't leave his contact information. Okay, I'm in. A wise choice. Chapter 952. Yvette, calm down. You must calm down. You can do it. In an alley behind a coffee shop, a young white girl was standing nervously and cheering herself on. She held a small video camera in one hand and a self-defense taser in her bag in the other. In the United States, where guns and violence were rampant, one must be fully prepared to blackmail a person. Otherwise, the confrontation of words could turn into a bloody conflict at any time, or even rape and murder. If it wasn't for the fact that there were too many secrets involved, and that once revealed, it was likely that she would fall into eternal damnation, she would not hesitate to spend a lot of money to hire a bodyguard. But unfortunately, reality was often cruel. If you wanted to get something, you had to pay the corresponding price. No one was an exception. After waiting anxiously for 7 or 8 minutes, a fat man with a round figure finally got out of a Lincoln car and quickly got into the alley. He roared angrily, F***CK. You F***king bitch dare to threaten me. Quickly hand over the cassette, or I'll teach you a lesson. Mr. Claudian, don't be so agitated. Here, this is the cassette that you want. Of course, it's just a copy. The real original is kept in a very safe place. If you don't do as I say, then the cassette will be sent to your wife. As far as I know, she is quite dissatisfied with you. If she gets evidence of your infidelity, guess what she will do? If it were me, I would definitely find a powerful lawyer and directly ask for a divorce and divide as much property as possible. Yvette was obviously not frightened by the other party's aggressive look. Instead, she calmly threatened. Before going out today, she had practiced several times at home. Although she was very nervous, she still said what she wanted to say very smoothly. There was no other way. When it came to extortion, blackmail, and blackmail, the most important thing was that one had to abandon one's sense of morality and shame and turn oneself into a complete scum. Yvette was undoubtedly far from being able to do this, so she could only try to be tough. Because she longed for wealth, longed to be a member of the upper class, longed to be like those rich young American girls, to enjoy the sun, the beach, fine wine, delicious food, designer clothes, shoes, cosmetics, wild parties, handsome men, and so on. After all, desire was a very wonderful thing. It could make the most humble person brave, just to change their original, ordinary fate. No, I won't listen to you. Give me the original car now. Claudian roared as he grabbed the girl's neck. Similar to most white American men, the first thing he thought of after being threatened was not to use his wisdom, but to use violence without thinking. T. Damn fat pig. You forced me to do this. Without saying a word, Yvette took out the taser and pressed the trigger switch. Pa 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 pa. Accompanied by the crisp sound of the electric current, Claudian convulsed and fell to the ground with a plop. However, because the power of the self-defense taser was not very high, he did not fall into a coma. He only lost the ability to move and struggled to get up. But Yvette would not let go of such an opportunity. She lifted the sharp front of her high heel and kicked the man's vital part. Ah! There was a heart-wrenching pain in the world called the pain in the balls. Now, poor Claudian was experiencing it personally. His round head and face showed a strange purplish red. Idiot! Wait for your wife to sue you in court. Yvette stomped on the man's left hand and was about to turn and leave. Don't go. We can talk again. Claudian was scared out of his wits. He did not care about the pain in his balls and grabbed the girl's ankle. Talk. No, we have nothing to talk about. Either do as I say, or go back and wait for death. There's no third way. Also, take your dirty hand away. Yvette gave an ultimatum in an extremely strong manner. She had realized that the fatty in front of her was actually a piece of trash that bullied the weak and feared the strong. As long as she acted tough, there was nothing to worry about. Damn it, that's a few $1 million. I need at least a week to wash it clean. Claudian gritted his teeth and cursed. As a lecherous man who liked to hunt for women, he began to hate himself at this moment. At the beginning, he did not control his lower body. As a result, he ended up like this. Money laundering was not terrible. All the major banks, financial industry, and accounting firms in the United States were basically doing it. But the terrible thing was that almost all money laundering was not a one-time deal. Once you entered the industry, you would not be able to quit in this lifetime. What Claudian was really afraid of was whether the woman in front of him was a spy sent by some gangs or drug lords to test the waters. If he met the other party's request, would there be another 10 million or even 100 million? If it really came to this, it would not take long for him to be on the blacklist of the FBI, Drug Enforcement Administration, and the IRS. No problem. I will give you a week. At the same time, I will allow you to take 5% of the profits. Remember, make it clean. I don't want any trouble in the future. Do you understand? Yvette bent down and gently patted the fat man's slightly fat face. This humiliating action made Claudian full of anger, but he did not dare to make the slightest move to resist. He could only watch the girl stuff the bag full of black money in her trunk and then drove away. A few minutes later, when Yvette returned to the second-hand BMW, she immediately waved her fist and cheered loudly. It was a success. I really did it. At least I didn't let that fat pig take advantage of me for nothing. Well done. This is a very good start. Next, you have to learn to use him to complete the original capital accumulation. Sitting in the driver's seat, Zhang Cheng encouraged her with a smile on his face. Original capital accumulation? Yvette was obviously stunned for a moment. Zhang Cheng nodded gently. Yes. Original capital accumulation. Don't tell me you think you can enter the upper class with just a few $1 million? No, dear, it's far from that. Because you have no connections and no talent, you can't gain wealth from the fierce and cruel market competition. So I suggest you to find some inspiration from criminal law, that is, to act as a middleman for money laundering. Chicago is a city of gangs. There are more than 200 gangs, large and small. As long as you can persuade one or two of them, let them give you part of the illegal gains, and then through Claudian to wash it clean, you can earn a 10% to 15% commission. See how simple it is and how profitable it is. The most important thing is that you have a one-way contact. As long as you're not too greedy, you almost don't have to worry about being caught. Chapter 953. How easy was it for a senior staff working in the finance industry to launder money? The answer was that as long as they roped in a few key partners, it was even easier than working in a legitimate industry. They could easily launder tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dirty money. In just less than a month, under the training of Zhang Cheng, Yvette completed a small money laundering gang and began to methodically take over the gang business. And Claudian, who was still a little rebellious before, also plunged in after tasting the sweetness, greedily enjoying the high commission. In this country where money determined social status, not many people could resist the temptation of money, especially watching their own wealth increase. Anyone could not help but have a kind of accelerated heartbeat and the pleasure produced by a large amount of adrenaline secretion. Although these pieces of paper were extremely cheap and worthless, in fact, they were just a medium of exchange, but in modern society, they were given a new definition, that is, the distribution of social resources. To be precise, it was the second means of mobilizing social resources in addition to violence. Lying on the newly bought expensive waterbed, Yvette was enjoying a bottle of champagne that cost thousands of dollars. While looking at the 8-digit savings in the bank account, she smiled and sighed. So this is money laundering? Without alerting anyone, I used a normal account to complete a transaction that didn't exist, followed by completing an investment bit by bit through financial means, and finally transferring it to my account through legal channels. Unless the owner of those accounts finds something wrong and calls the police, otherwise, I will never have to worry about being found out. Yes, you have to understand, in the initial stage of capital accumulation, almost no one would take the law seriously. Look at the donor statues set up by those famous universities. How many of them started by selling drugs in Asia, and how many of them had close cooperation with the mafia? But now, they're the real rulers of this country, called the blue blood aristocrats, monopolizing all aspects of this country. In fact, the nature of this world is dirty, dark, and evil, and good people can never be qualified to be leaders. If all the politicians and tycoons in the United States were killed, I can guarantee that each and every one of them would go to hell. Zhang Cheng revealed the chilling truth with a smile on his face. As a transcendent from a mortal to a transcendent, he also believed in some so-called classics when he was young, the most famous of which was the core idea of Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations, which was that there was an invisible hand controlling the market. According to the scholar's understanding, the government should not interfere with economic activities, but let the market and capital regulate themselves. The more freedom the businessmen obtained, the more prosperous the market itself, and thus create more wealth. Countless media, economists, and politicians in the world have regarded this as a classic and wantonly to open the market and not do too much regulation. But the reality? This invisible hand did not exist at all. The market did not have the so-called self-regulation. If capital was allowed to run rampant in the market, the result would be that the economic lifeline of a country was controlled by a few or even a dozen groups, and more than 90% of the wealth created by human production activities would flow to a few people. The financial crisis, the freight forwarding crisis, the economic bubble, the increasing unemployment rate, the rapid increase in prices, and the almost stagnant income of ordinary people, the cruel reality of the modern international society all meant that Adam Smith's idea was wrong. And those media, economists, and politicians who advocated the invisible hand in the wealth of nations were all bought and controlled by capital. Ha! Shouldn't I be honored to go to hell with so many big shots? Yvette took a big gulp of champagne and laughed happily. She couldn't help but laugh. Under the bombardment of the American news media, she had always thought that the reason why the rich could become rich was that they were smarter, harder working, and had higher ideals and pursuits than the poor. But after these days of contact, the girls suddenly realized that the so-called rich were actually a group of demons in human skin. Almost every famous family had a dark history hidden behind it. Some of their ancestors were drug dealers, some were gang leaders, some were big slave owners, some were forced to sell alcohol under the prohibition, some relied on naked money and power transactions, and some directly robbed the land and wealth of the native Indians. Carefully calculating, from the rich on Wall Street to the president's family, there was no clean one. No, you're not qualified to go to hell now. Zhang Cheng shook his head meaningfully. Oh, then what should I do next? Yvette put down the empty glass, held her chin, and asked with interest. Zhang Cheng replied without thinking. It's very simple. Now that you have enough money, the next thing to do is to package yourself and then appear in front of everyone with a different attitude. Package? Yvette raised her eyebrows in surprise. Yes, package. If you want to be accepted by those high society members who think highly of themselves, you must first make yourself look like a successful person. So you must start a business, establish your own company, and make people look at you with a history of struggle from scratch. Remember the countless entrepreneurial myths that were touted by the media and the legends of those founders? Next, you will become one of them. Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and said meaningfully, Yvette, I don't understand. What does this have to do with entering the high society? It's a very simple interest relationship. In general, you have to prove that you have a strong ability to make money, so as to attract the interest of those financial capital tycoons. Then, at an appropriate time, accept their capital into your company, and then list it on NASDAQ, bringing them rich returns. With common interests, they will treat you as one of their own and let you into their circle. In addition, you will also gain the admiration and praise of countless idiots. Starting from scratch, how inspirational, how politically correct, it is simply the direct embodiment of the American dream. If you're interested in sex in the future, maybe you can use this to enter politics and become the first female president of the United States of America in a few years. When saying these words, Zhang Cheng opened his arms, and his tone was full of impassioned words, drawing a beautiful blueprint for the other party's future. What was the most interesting thing about this type of game? Of course, it was to personally change a person's fate and push them to the peak of life. Chapter 954. For ordinary people, starting a business was never an easy task. Not to mention the shockingly high failure rate. Just the serious consequences that one had to bear was enough to make most people afraid. Often, one failure would cause one to bear an unimaginably huge debt, and one might even be locked up in prison for a few years. But for the rich, entrepreneurship with sufficient capital was easier than eating and drinking. On one hand, they had sufficient funds and connections, and they could easily deal with people or company executives that ordinary entrepreneurs could not reach. On the other hand, they did not have to worry about the painful price they had to pay after failure. In just 2 weeks, Yvette had used the money she had laundered to establish a fashion clothing company in Chicago. No well-known designer? She spent a lot of money to poach people from other companies. No popularity? A lot of advertising money was spent, and the publicity was overwhelming. Popular stars were invited to endorse the brand, and editors of various fashion magazines were bribed to say more good things about the brand. Anyway, fashion products, to put it bluntly, relied on one word: bragging. Regardless of whether it looked good or not, as long as it was famous, there would naturally be the first batch of customers. After the fame continued to ferment for a while, it would gradually be recognized by the market and slowly promoted to luxury jewelry, becoming a prop to reflect the identity of some people. Just like the saying goes, the social class between people never disappeared. It just continued to exist in another way. In the past, people divided the class by bloodline and surname, but now people divided the class by wealth. There was not much difference in essence, and the dazzling array of luxury goods just happened to satisfy this latent psychological need. The diffusion effect brought by advertising and stars swept through Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and other important cities. The loss-making company, which was supported by dirty money, actually became profitable in the 3rd month. Although it was not much, only about $800,000, it was a very important turning point. Looking at the eye-catching black numbers on the financial statement, Yvette, who was nervous for more than 2 months, finally breathed a sigh of relief. She gritted her teeth and complained, T. In just 2 months, he had already spent $23 million US. You're simply a lunatic. Do you know? Every day when I see the money lost, I feel a sense of fear. Relax, it's only $20 million. Do you know how much Coca-Cola spends on advertising every year? In my opinion, whether it is fast food, drinks, fashion clothing, or luxury accessories, they are essentially brainwashing the people through various subtle influences and influencing their original values. Just look at the Milan Fashion Week, then at the high-end fashion shows in Los Angeles and New York. How many expensive clothes and shoes were designed like SH*T? Yet, there were still a lot of people following the trend. So don't be stingy with your investment in advertising and public relations. At least before you have the right to speak in this industry, don't be stingy with spending money. Zhang Cheng sat in a chair and played darts while explaining casually. The longer he stayed in this city of gangs, the more his control over his body penetrated. Now, he could easily mobilize more than half of his strength without worrying about losing control. What? He still had to continue losing money. Good God, if I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have made myself unhappy. I would have just taken the money and enjoyed it happily for the rest of my life. Yvette covered her face in pain. Not long ago, she was a poor ghost who didn't even have a $100 bill. But now, she could sign hundreds of thousands and even millions of dollars without batting an eyelid. This huge leap in a short period of time made her feel like she was better off dead. Are you really willing to be a waste that only knows how to enjoy? No, that's not what you think in the deepest part of your heart. You thirst for wealth, thirst for power, thirst for being a big shot, and this company is your stepping stone. Well, don't complain. The loss is only temporary. I promise it won't be long before we start to make a big profit. Remember, you're going to become the darling of the upper class. Don't be blinded by short-term interests. Zhang Cheng warned him earnestly. Okay, I'll listen to you. Yvette sighed helplessly. Just when she wanted to say something, the phone in Zhang Cheng's pocket that had been silent for a long time suddenly rang. Sorry, excuse me for a moment. Without any hesitation, Zhang Cheng immediately stood up and walked out of the office. He went to the empty bathroom and quickly took out the phone and pressed the answer button. The next second, a familiar voice came through the phone. Good afternoon, dear Mr. Senator. I'm Igor Hamilton. Good afternoon, my friend. Why are you suddenly calling me? Is there something urgent? Zhang Cheng asked calmly. Since the last time he reached an alliance agreement with the people behind the scenes in the UA, he never contacted them again. Something must have happened in the underground world. In the past few days, the council has been very active. I want to know what happened. Are they finally going to make a move on us? Igor's voice revealed a strong sense of concern. Active? Zhang Cheng instantly showed a puzzled expression. There was no doubt that he didn't know the impact of the war that destroyed heaven on the entire underground world. Igor, yes. North America, no. It's the lords of the underground world all over the world who are crazily expanding their manpower. It looks like a full-scale war is about to break out. Sorry, I've been on vacation recently, so I don't know what happened. If you don't mind, give me some time. I'll let you know after I figure it out. Zhang Cheng casually made up an excuse. Okay, but please hurry. No problem. Give me half an hour. As the last word fell, Zhang Cheng directly hung up the phone and dialed the second number on the contact list. In just a few seconds, the call was connected. Master, is it you? The Pullman asked in surprise. Of course it's me. Tell me, what happened in the underground world recently? Why are all the lords expanding their forces? Zhang Cheng asked straightforwardly. The Pullman hesitated for a moment, then lowered his voice and said, This is an order issued by the Supreme Council. According to the information obtained, Hell destroyed heaven in a war. This made the chairmen and senators all over the world very nervous, so they are all preparing for a possible war. War? I see. Zhang Cheng nodded thoughtfully. He instantly realized that he was the culprit behind all this. Chapter 955. Master, right now, the entire North American underground world is frantically recruiting people to expand their strength. Should we take action as well? Seeing that there was no response from the other side of the phone for a long time, Bowman immediately suggested cautiously. As someone who was not strong and relied entirely on his intelligence and operational methods to get to his current position, he was full of fear and cowardice when it came to war. There was no other way. Even an ordinary infernal demon was a powerful enemy that was difficult for him to defeat, not to mention the endless infernal demon army. If not for the fact that there was no way out, this guy would definitely choose to run instead of preparing for a possible war. Zhangqing obviously knew the Pullman's timid character very well. He chuckled and comforted him. Relax, there's no need to be so nervous. This war will not start for the time being. Also, remember not to tell anyone that I contacted you. Understood. If there's nothing else important, I'll hang up first. Okay, if anything happens in New York, I'll call you immediately. With a beep, the call was immediately cut off. Looking at the black screen, Zhangqing's lips curled up slightly. He muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "Interesting. I didn't expect that conquering hell and heaven would cause panic and vigilance in the Supreme Council. Maybe I can change the plan a little and try to lure the otherworldly civilization to invade Earth and see if the sleeping gods will have any reaction. Are you sure you want to open a portal to other worlds on Earth?" The Supreme God, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly asked. With a liquid star core and surging arcane energy absorbed in the process of seizing the Azeroth Titan's astral soul, it had been upgraded from an ordinary divine artifact to a powerful divine artifact worthy of the strongest Titan. Even if someone with no magical talent held it, they would be able to release a shocking spell that could destroy a city in an instant. Why not? Zhangqing asked meaningfully. According to the records of Hell, they have invaded many worlds, and many of them still retain the coordinates across time and space. As long as we build a few dark portals and provide a steady stream of evil energy, it will be easy to attract those aggressive magical races. Think about it. With the current fragile state of Earth civilization, how long can those governments established by ordinary people last? You plan to destroy mankind? There was a hint of surprise in the Supreme God's tone. No, not destruction, but reform. I want to start a revolution, to overthrow all order in this world, to plunge it into endless chaos, and then to reshape it in my own way. Think about it. If that woman who calls herself the Creator knew that all her efforts have been destroyed, how would she react? As he said this, Zhangqing's eyes flashed with a playful light. Creator? If even the world he created was beyond recognition, then what right did he have to call himself the Creator? Ah, I understand now. You want to provoke her and see how she reacts after witnessing the collapse of the world she created. I have to say, this is a very good strategy. It's like smashing the most beloved work of art or toy in front of its owner. Any living being with normal emotions would be enraged. The paramount heavenly god analyzed with an enlightened expression. Zhangqing nodded lightly and added, "Not only that, do you know? I've always wondered why the magic energy on this planet is so strange, and why I can't sense the pulse deep in the core of the planet. Perhaps the answer I've been searching for is hidden inside. So, there's no need to be too anxious. Let's test those sleeping gods first, and see if they've really lost their sense of the outside world. Or perhaps their hibernation is a trick used to deceive mortals, and they're hiding in the dark to scheme something. The paramount heavenly god, time, is now your friend. As an immortal titan, even if the flames of the stars are extinguished, you can still live until the end of the universe. Yes, time is now my friend. All right, let's stop chatting. Next, let's go meet some old friends and tell them that the time is ripe to start a revolution. It's time to overthrow the Supreme Council of North America and establish a new system. As Zhangqing spoke, he casually opened a teleportation gate. War, slaughter, destruction, death. You're becoming more and more like the Dark Titan Sargeras. The paramount heavenly god exclaimed. Sargeras? Don't compare me to that retard. Although he's very powerful, he doesn't have the intelligence to match it. I admit that he's a brave and fearless warrior, but at the same time, he's also a ruthless destroyer. When it comes to scheming, he can't even compare to his weakest subordinate, the feared demon lord. 10 hours later, in a private room of a shabby restaurant on the outskirts of Chicago, Zhangqing was eating a steak that didn't taste very good. He smiled and said to several old fellows who had rushed over from all over the United States, "Everyone, I have 2 pieces of good news to tell you now. The first is that the Supreme Council's expansion This time isn't to deal with you guys, but to deal with the demons of hell who just destroyed heaven. The second is even more exciting. Do you remember the revolution I told you about before? Now, the time is ripe. What? Igor abruptly jumped up from his chair, his eyes glowing with blood-red light. I said, the time is ripe for a revolution. I believe you've all noticed that in the past 2 months, there have been a large number of sudden awakening of superpowers in the United States. This isn't a coincidence, but an opportunity. An opportunity to end the underground world's ruling structure, and also an opportunity to change the fate of the entire human race. As always, Zhang Cheng was good at using lies and deception to achieve his goals. As for allies, in his eyes, they were like toilet paper. After using them, they would naturally be flushed away in the toilet bowl. Only a dead ally was a good ally. Therefore, he didn't need to feel the slightest psychological burden when cheating his allies. You mean there will be more and more superpowers appearing in the future? And even the entire human race? Igor keenly grasped the main point. The entire human race is a little exaggerated, but 70 to 80% is still possible. My dear friends, the key to the future is already in our hands. What are you still afraid of? As long as we work together and wait for the Supreme Council and the demons of hell to suffer, we can immediately take advantage of the situation and spread the first handful of soil to bury the rotten rule of the underground world. Chapter 956. Information asymmetry was an unparalleled advantage. Not only could it allow the profiteers to exchange the cheapest industrial product, glass balls, for a large amount of priceless gold, jewelry, and spices, but could also easily manipulate the fields of finance, trade, and so on, leaving those ignorant investors and trading partners in tears. Obviously, Zhang Cheng had the absolute advantage of information asymmetry in the face of these old guys who had been hiding in the shadows of the United States for hundreds of years. On the one hand, he was the mastermind behind everything. On the other hand, he had the dual identities of a member of the Supreme Council and a master alchemist. His status and identity were not something that the other party could compare with. Therefore, it didn't take long for him to fool all these old foxes. They all expressed their willingness to do their best to overthrow the Supreme Council's rule in North America. After all, for them, the Supreme Council that ruled the underground world was like the sword of Damocles hanging over their heads, which could fall at any time. By then, not to mention money, power, and status, even their lives and families would be lost. Just look at the cruel methods of a European Council, which harvested a wave of people every few hundred years, and you could see how cruel the underground world was to those who tried to infiltrate their forces. Therefore, as long as there was hope of overthrowing the Supreme Council, they would be the most active group of people. After dealing with these old men who had great power in the United States, Zhang Cheng quickly got a human skin magic book from hell, which densely recorded the worlds that had been invaded by the demonic army. After a simple exploration, he found that most of them had turned into barren wastelands, but there were still a few that were lucky enough to escape and began to regain their vitality. In particular, one of the worlds called Lavinia had developed a rather advanced magic civilization, and several of the most powerful countries were full of aggressiveness. They constantly launched invasion wars to plunder people, resources, and land. Their greed was no less than that of the European powers from the 16th to the 19th century. If they found a portal to Earth, they would definitely take the lead in launching an invasion war without saying a word. Of course, due to the gap in overall strength, this world alone was definitely not enough. It might be able to cause considerable casualties in the beginning, but once the major military powers on Earth reacted, they would immediately launch a counterattack or even enter the other world to occupy the enemy's territory. Therefore, to be on the safe side, Zhang Cheng insidiously chose a world filled with monsters. Because this planet had been polluted by demons, almost all the beasts had inevitably inherited the bloodline of hell. Not only were they huge, but they were also abnormally fierce. Once they found something alive, they would immediately take the initiative to attack. They would never stop until the target was killed. If such monsters swarmed into the city in droves, Even a professional army equipped with modern weapons would have a hard time dealing with them, unless the government was willing to release a large amount of nuclear warheads to wipe out the entire city. As a man of action, after Zhang Cheng completed the modification of the entire plan, he began to quietly build the Door of Darkness in the depths of the forest. 3 in North America, 2 in South America, 3 in Europe, 2 in Africa, 1 in Australia, 2 in South Asia, 1 in Central Asia, 1 in East Asia, 2 in the Pacific, 2 in the Atlantic, and 1 in the Indian Ocean. If it was in the past, building so many doors of darkness in one go would take at least 2 to 3 years. But now, after becoming a Titan, he could finish one in about an hour or so. It took less than a week to build all the doors of darkness, and he also added a lot of invisibility spells to ensure that they would not be easily discovered by satellites and planes. After finishing all this, he quietly returned to Chicago. Looking at the bright moon in the sky, he smiled and muttered to himself, "Since all the preparations have been completed, let the game begin." As soon as he finished speaking, a bright arcane light soared into the sky, illuminating the dim sky. At the same time, the doors of darkness located all over the world were also activated, resonating with the ancient portals left by the demons on the planet. About an hour later, more than a dozen beasts covered in hard scales quietly came to Earth, leaving the swamp and entering Miami, Florida. A young man and woman who were having sex on the beach did not even have time to scream before they became the first victims. In addition, in the depths of the mountains where the Japanese rarely went, a group of fully armed and ferocious-looking orcs rushed directly into a small village at the foot of the mountain and slaughtered about 30 farmers. The leader picked up the headless corpse and sneered in a language that only they could understand. "Aha! Look, what a weak race. It seems that the Empire conquering this place is as easy as blowing off dust. He send a message. Immediately organize an expeditionary force. We will become heroes." Another orc grinned and showed a ferocious smile. In less than a week, the news media began to appear one after another about mutated beasts eating people, giant sea monsters attacking ports, and mysterious deaths in a remote village. Just when most people thought that the media deliberately created fake news to gain attention, the first full-scale invasion from another world finally took place in Japan, which had left Asia and entered Europe. A total of 100,000 fully armed orcs poured into Tokyo and slaughtered more than 500,000 civilians in just an hour. Blood and corpses were scattered all over the streets. The Japanese government was shocked. The American troops stationed in Japan were shocked. The underground world was shocked as well. In particular, the live broadcast shot by helicopters from above was more persuasive than any pale words. Earth was invaded by intelligent species from another world. As for what happened next, naturally, aircraft, artillery, tanks, and warships were deployed to attack these ferocious invaders. For a time, missiles, artillery shells, and aviation bombs were scattered over Japan. It directly turned from one of the most prosperous cities in the world into a smoke-filled battlefield. Needless to say, the city was finished. Even if it was successfully recovered, it would be impossible to restore it to its previous state in a short period of time. The large number of deaths and the destruction caused by the war could not be measured with money. This boring world has finally become interesting, hasn't it? Zhang Cheng sat in front of the TV, enjoying the tragedy that he had single-handedly directed while eating popcorn with a smile on his face. His relaxed and joyful attitude did not seem like he was watching the news at all, but a thrilling disaster movie. Chapter 9:57. Miami was attacked by unknown creatures. Hundreds of people were killed. Tokyo has become a battlefield. Tens of thousands of humanoid creatures are killing civilians in the city. At least 1 million people have died so far. Every day, the U.S. military has lost 2,000 people. More than 20 helicopters and hundreds of tanks have been scrapped. Giant sea monsters have landed in India, causing 150,000 people to die. Tens of thousands of ferocious monsters suddenly emerged in the mountains of Bafu, Germany, and began to massacre the residents of the surrounding towns and cities. Rio de Janeiro is occupied by more than 200,000 suspected Nagas. The Brazilian government forces are engaged in a fierce firefight with them. With the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the 24-hour news broadcast on TV was basically all news that made the people feel extremely panicked. It was as if the end of the world was coming overnight. For a time, whether it was the big countries with strong military power or the third-rate countries that relied solely on buying to meet the needs of the military, all of them lost their sense of security. There was a wave of frantic buying in supermarkets and stores in many places. In order to deal with the possible crisis, people began to crazily stock up on food, water, daily necessities, medicine, clothes, tissues, and other necessities. Some people bought guns and ammunition crazily, turning their homes and basements into strong fortresses. In less than a month or two, the order of many governments seemed to have lost most of their functions. All kinds of vicious cases such as shootings, robberies, rapes, and murders emerged one after another. The most important thing was that people's confidence in paper money began to collapse. They either spent all their savings, overdrawing every credit card, or changed all their money into gold, which could preserve their value. Such a terrible and large-scale panic spread quickly like a plague. The financial market suffered a heavy blow in an instant, and the banking payment system was also in jeopardy. There were even many cults that preached the coming of the end of the world that took the opportunity to rise, occupying some small towns that the government could not estimate. They began to force ordinary people who had no power to satisfy their evil desires. Many of them were worshippers of the devil, providing a steady stream of high-quality souls to hell. However, as the country with the most powerful military in the world, the United States could no longer care about those small towns or cities that could not provide much tax revenue. They were busy quelling the crises that broke out in important cities all over the world. There was no other way. They had the most overseas military bases. This was especially true for the U.S. military stationed in Japan. Their losses were so severe that the Department of Defense and Congress were heartbroken. After all, the death of an American soldier cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the loss of an armed helicopter cost tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars, not to mention the nuclear submarines, aircraft carriers, and Aegis cruisers that were sunk by giant sea monsters. In just a month after the invasion, the losses of the military alone exceeded $1 trillion USD. There was no doubt that the order of the world of ordinary people was collapsing, while the underground world continued to remain silent. This was because they still had not figured out whether these monsters and invaders from this world were the vanguard of the demons attacking Earth. Standing at the highest point of an office building in Chicago, Zhang Cheng appreciated the city full of chaos and despair below. He chuckled and said to himself, "What a fragile civilization." It was like a castle built on the beach that would collapse with a gentle push from the waves. Next, it was time to start a revolution and end the Supreme Council, which was an organization all over the world, so that humans could undergo a second evolution and form a new subspecies in civilization. After all, it's too boring to have only one human on such an interesting planet, isn't it? Master, according to your plan, I have taken care of all the important lakes and rivers. Adam also appeared on the top floor of the building and reported in a low voice. Very good. I'll give you another mission. Take over the intelligence organization I founded and turn it into a monitoring organization. From now on, they don't need to collect any more intelligence, but they are responsible for monitoring the speed of the awakening of human supernatural powers. Remember, don't interfere too much. Let them compete and kill each other under natural conditions as much as possible. Zhang Cheng stroked his chin and ordered casually, "Don't we need to destroy the underground world and the governments first?" Adam looked up in surprise. No need, because I'll go back and take care of them myself. Because destroying order is what I'm best at, and I enjoy the process." With that, Zhang Cheng leaped out of the atmosphere and looked down at the blue planet from above. Soon, he opened his arms and created a huge gravitational force that attracted hundreds of asteroids and threw them at the government elites and military bases. Huff, huff, huff. Along with the shocking heat generated by the friction with the atmosphere, these large asteroids fell at an unimaginable speed. Although some of them were intercepted by the anti-missile system, more than 70% of them hit their targets accurately. Boom, 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 boom. Just with the powerful kinetic energy, these small asteroids produced a shocking destructive force that was far beyond the reach of the most powerful human nuclear weapons. Flash crash, tsunami, volcanic eruption. Most of the capitalists, politicians, chairmen of the underground world, and counselors who were usually high and mighty were turned into ashes under the first wave of impact. They didn't even know who did all this, and they didn't understand that in the eyes of a powerful titan, they were just ants that could be trampled on at any time. The collapse of order meant chaos, destruction, and killing. It meant that people no longer needed to follow the cumbersome laws, and it also meant that the law of the jungle was back. Coupled with the fact that more and more people began to awaken supernatural powers, they quickly formed small organizations and competed with other organizations for the necessary resources to survive. This was especially true in the big cities, where fierce exchanges of fire broke out almost every day. Violence had become an indispensable part of human interaction. In about a year or two, the Earth's population had been reduced from 6 billion to about 500 million. More than 90% of the population had been cruelly eliminated, and the rest had left the cities and returned to a primitive life based on agricultural production. Of course, this had little to do with Zhang Cheng. He remained in outer space, patiently observing the situation on the ground, trying to find signs that the gods had awakened from their deep slumber. Unfortunately, despite such a huge commotion and the presence of countless invaders from other worlds on Earth, the gods still acted as if they did not feel anything. Sometimes, Yang even suspected that these fellows had already died in their sleep. Otherwise, why was there no reaction? Did they not care about the life and death of the intelligent creatures on this planet? Among them, the woman who called herself the Creator had cut off the connection between the two of them after Yang had been promoted to a Titan. Chapter 958. After drifting aimlessly in the Earth's orbit for hundreds of years, Zhang Cheng finally got tired of waiting. He decided to return to the ground and see if he could find any useful clues. After all, even though time was meaningless to him, he couldn't waste it like this. Soon, he turned into a meteor and broke through the atmosphere at an extremely fast speed, heading toward the place called Rester in the North American continent. The previous large-scale asteroid attack completely changed the geographical structure of the original 7 continents and 4 oceans on Earth, especially the North American continent, which was hit by a huge iron-nickel alloy asteroid, was directly split into 2 from the middle, forming a large pearl chain of islands in the middle. There were more than hundreds of islands of various sizes. What was more interesting was that this land that was once free and democratic had degenerated into a primitive feudal system, and slaves were even allowed to be bought and sold. As the largest of the Pearl Chain Islands, Rester was named after its owner, who built a city for small towns and more than 300 villages on it. Count Candida Rester was the current head of the Rester family. He was also the feudal lord with the most fleets and armies in the archipelago. He controlled 70% of the trade between the 2 continents of North America. He was definitely worthy of being called the overlord of the entire sea. However, he had encountered a small problem. His daughter had actually run away from home alone in order to escape the marriage alliance. Furthermore, she had stolen a small warship and even declared that she wanted to become a free pirate. God, is there anything in the world that is more troublesome than this? No. I have to get my daughter back no matter what. Thinking of this, he immediately turned around and ordered his men in sturdy armor. Bring a group of people and capture Joanna for me. But remember, don't hurt her, understand? Understood. Please rest assured. I will bring the young lady back safe and sound. The brawny man patted his chest hard, turned around, and disappeared at the end of the corridor without saying another word. Watching the figure of his men gradually disappear into the distance, Candida Rester sighed helplessly and muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "Since the arrival of Doomsday, the family has been rooted here for more than 270 years. I hope that no accidents will happen in my generation." At the same time, a young girl with fiery red hair who looked to be about 18 years old was standing on a large wooden sailboat. She was wearing a short-sleeved shirt and was observing the sea with a telescope. After a full minute, she pointed at the fiery red trail in the distant sky and shouted, "Look! What's that? Oh my God! It must be a demon from hell. Miss Chow Anna, we'd better turn around and leave as soon as possible." A man who looked like he was in his 30s tried to persuade her. "Bastard, how many times have I told you? Don't call me Miss, call me Captain, Captain Joanna. Also, you're not allowed to change your course and just rush over. I want to see what that thing is." The young girl rolled her eyes in annoyance. "Are you crazy? If the Count knew about this, he would definitely skin me alive." The man couldn't help but shiver. "Oomph. If you don't follow my orders, I'll skin you alive. Cut the crap and act quickly. I think it must be a precious treasure." "Ah, okay, you're the captain." With a helpless sigh, the sailboat finally came to the sea where the fireball fell. They lowered the boat and started to look for the thing that fell from the sky not long ago. After a while, a sailor shouted at the top of his voice, "I found it. There's a person over there." "A person?" Following the direction he pointed, Joanna quickly took out her telescope and found a naked man on the sea. He was walking on the sea with a strange pace. Before anyone could react to what had happened, the other party had already crossed a distance of at least 1,000 meters in an instant. He stood on the deck of the ship and looked around with his eyes that were emitting bone-chilling coldness. Without asking, it was obvious that this was Zhang Cheng, who just fell from the Earth's orbit. "Who are you?" A big sailor immediately pulled out his machete and got into a fighting stance. English? No, that's not right. It's not English, French, German, or Spanish. Oh, I understand. A few hundred years is enough for the alphabet to undergo a series of huge changes in the language. So this should be a brand new language. Zhang Cheng touched his chin and said to himself. It had to be said that because the elites on Earth almost all died overnight, it directly led to a major regression of technology in the first 100 years. Coupled with the rise of supernatural forces, by the end of the second 100 years, human technology had regressed to the Middle Ages. But it was replaced by some more interesting magic technology and civilization. Just like the saying goes, the evolution of human civilization from a low level to a high level was actually not a gradual and inevitable trend as many people thought. On the contrary, it was the promotion of countless accidents that led to the development of the knowledge system called natural science and materialism. Hey, kid, I'm asking you another question. The big sailor was obviously not satisfied with the other party, ignoring him and scolded him harshly. Through direct reading and copying of memories, Zhang Cheng obtained the language used in the islands in the blink of an eye. He replied with a faint smile, "Are you talking to me? Damn it, you're courting death." Sailors had not been a good profession since ancient times, especially in the age of sail. Basically, every sailor was a potential pirate. So this guy who boasted of his powerful strength swung his machete and slashed at his thigh. Needless to say, he did not really intend to kill, but just wanted to teach Zhang Cheng a lesson. The next second, boom, this poor guy was directly hit by a fireball the size of a wash basin. His whole body flew into the air and then slammed into the mast behind him. From top to bottom, he was turned into charred carboniferous, emitting a pungent smell. Silence. Extreme silence. The boisterous sailors were like chicks whose necks were stuck. Their eyes were filled with unconcealable shock. But Joanna's reaction was just the opposite. She immediately ran forward and asked excitedly, "Sir, you must be a powerful psychic, right? I solemnly invite you to join the pirate group. I believe that with your help, it won't take long for us to become famous on the sea." Chapter 9:59. Pirates. Hearing this familiar word, Zhang Cheng's eyes flashed with a hint of playfulness as he directly read the girl's thoughts and memories. In just a few seconds, he figured out the current state of civilization in North America. The mainland on the original Pacific Ocean side was mainly ruled by the descendants of the people who secretly controlled the United States. About 8 countries of various sizes were established, and more than 8,000 nobles were in theft. With tens of thousands of soldiers with superpowers trained in Alaska, the old guys led by Igor took advantage of the disaster and launched a 25-year-old bloody war with the North American Supreme Underground Council. In the end, with 4 nuclear warheads that were preserved, they directly perished with the Supreme Council and laid the foundation for independence for their descendants. The mainland on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean was controlled by the defeated council members and lords. Because no one was willing to submit to another, it was now in chaos. There were wars almost every day. All kinds of bandits, pirates, and bandits emerged one after another. There was even a terrible slavery system. The most important thing was that the collapse of order led to a cliff-like decline in technology and industry. Even the precious technology of papermaking that carried civilization and knowledge was lost. Therefore, in just a few hundred years, not many people remembered how brilliant and developed the civilization system that humans had created before. Most ordinary people couldn't even read, especially the firearms that had been developed for hundreds of years. Now, only a few skilled craftsmen could make 1 or 2 by hand. Most people were still using backward cold weapons. As for those big cities in the past, they were now covered by dense plants and were full of monsters from another world. Only a few teams with confidence in their own strength dared to go in and explore. In addition, with the continuous influence of several artifacts on the water source of the entire world, more and more humans who survived the disaster began to awaken supernatural powers, accounting for more than 50% of the total population. However, most of them were useless abilities, while those with great destructive power would become targets that various forces would fight to rope in. Simply put, in the new era of the decline of technology, supernatural abilities had become the standard to measure the strength of a person. And because this ability could be passed on to future generations along with the bloodline, there were gradually some families based on this. There is no doubt that the people on this ship regarded the fireball that Zhang Cheng just released as a kind of supernatural ability. Sir, have you considered my proposal? I swear as the captain that you have the right to at least 1/3 of all the spoils in the future. Joanna promised. This girl, who had been well protected since childhood, obviously didn't realize how dangerous and crazy a monster she was dealing with. Zhang Cheng inspected the small wooden sailboat that could only accommodate less than 100 people and nodded with a chuckle. Okay, I agree. Now, please prepare a set of clothes, shoes, and socks, and a separate room for me. Of course. No problem. Old Banksy, go to the captain's cabin and get that coat out of the closet and give it to this gentleman, Joanna shouted cheerfully to an old man of about 50 years of age. The old Banksy, the old Banksy, the old Banksy, Banksy, and Banksy, 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 Banksy of the Banksy, 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 Banksy. Banksy, Zhang Cheng didn't have a habit of showing off. After politely thanking Banksy, he immediately put on the clothes. He looked energetic and handsome. Looking at the handsome man in front of her, Joanna didn't know why, but she suddenly felt her heart beating faster. She quickly avoided the other party's bright eyes and took the initiative to introduce herself. My name is Joanna, Joanna Rester. Nice to meet you. Hello, Joanna. My name is Zhang Cheng. Zhang Cheng directly reported his name. After hundreds of years, almost all the surviving humans on the ground had completely forgotten about the past, so he didn't have to worry about anyone recognizing him. Just when the girl wanted to say something, the lookout standing on the mast suddenly shouted, "There's a ship on the port side. It's a big ship." What? The old man, who was called Banksy, immediately raised the monocular in his hand and looked in the direction the lookout was pointing at. He saw a ship that was much bigger than this small battleship. It was covered in sails and was braving the wind and waves. There was a black skull flag on the top of the sails. Oh no, it's the Sea Serpent. It's the ship of the undead Captain Ryan. Quick, turn the ship around. If you don't want to die, take out all the goods in the cabin and throw them into the sea. Hurry up. Old Banksy roared loudly. The expression on his face was so nervous that even the hand holding the scimitar was slightly trembling. Undead Captain Ryan? Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows with a smile that didn't look like a smile. He really didn't understand why these pirates always like to give themselves or others such messy nicknames. Old Banksy nodded seriously. That's right. Undead Captain Ryan is one of the most powerful pirates in this sea. It's said that he can resurrect and control dead bodies, and he can also let living corpses retain all the fighting skills they had when they were alive. Get ready for battle, Mr. Zhang. If they catch up, we can only count on you. If the worst comes to worst, please be sure to take Miss Joanna and leave. I'll try my best to buy some time for you. Hee, don't be so pessimistic. I don't think a mere pirate ship can pose any threat to me. Just as he finished speaking, Zhang Cheng turned around and said to the nervous girl beside him, Dear Captain, don't you want to be famous in this sea? Now, there's an opportunity. Not only should we not run away, but we should turn the ship around and kill all the guys who dare to resist on that pirate ship. Use blood and death to tell everyone that the sea is about to welcome a new master. You mean a fight? Joanna's eyes suddenly lit up and adrenaline surged. Her originally white face flushed with excitement. That's right. Why run away? Secretly running away from home was to prove to her father that even if she didn't get married, she still had enough capital to inherit the noble surname of Ryan. Perhaps now was the best time to prove this point. Fight, not run away. Thinking of this, she immediately shouted to the panicked sailors, Stop running away. Fight. I want to kill undead Captain Ryan. What? Miss, are you crazy? We'll die. Chapter 960. There is no doubt that these ferocious-looking pirates on the deck were actually Joanna's servants. Except for a few, most of them didn't have any actual combat experience, not to mention risking their lives against the truly ferocious pirates. They originally thought that their young lady said that she wanted to be a pirate, but she just ran out to relax, and when she was tired of playing, she would go back to her previous peaceful life. But who would have thought that this rebellious girl actually wanted to play for real? You dare to disobey my orders? Seeing that no one had the intention to turn the ship around, Joanna immediately became furious. She pulled out her rapier, which was more decorative than practical, and wanted to stab them several times, but in the end, she couldn't do it. My dear, do you know what a pirate ship's captain must do? Zhang Cheng whispered in the girl's ear like a devil. What is it? Joanna suppressed her anger and asked without turning her head. Zhang Cheng smiled and replied meaningfully, It is to maintain your own authority. You must make everyone afraid of you. Afraid of you. In this way, you can make this group of desperados obey your orders. Don't be afraid of killing. If you shrink back at this time, then the crew will lose their sense of awe, and thus lose their sense of awe. As the last word fell, Joanna's pupils suddenly shrank, and then with lightning speed, she stabbed the rapier in her hand forward. Puff! In an instant, the sharp tip of the rapier penetrated the neck of an unlucky man. Although he desperately tried to cover the wound that was constantly spurting blood, it was all in vain. In the end, within a few seconds, he fell to the ground and breathed his last. More than 40 sailors, including old Banksy, stared with their eyes wide open. It seemed that they couldn't believe that the noble lady, who was a little naughty and rebellious, but was always very kind, actually killed a servant who had followed her for 10 years without mercy. Clap, 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 clap. Zhang Cheng applauded and softly praised. Well done. The best way to deal with those who dare to challenge your authority is to punish them with pain, blood, and death. Now, please try to give them orders again. I guarantee that you will get a different result. Turn the ship around. Immediately. Immediately. Don't make me say it a third time. Maybe it was because it was her first time killing someone, but Joanna's heart beat several times faster than usual, and her body revealed a faint trace of magic energy. Yes, Captain. Old Banku shuddered subconsciously and bowed respectfully. Then, he quickly turned the rudder and made a 180-degree turn, charging towards the sea serpent that was more than 10 times larger than the ship under his feet. Because both sides speed, in just a few minutes, the ships, the shipses. Of course, as for the accuracy, it's SS not success. This kind of noobs continued for about 2 or 3 rounds before they finally reached the most important part of the battle. There was no technique to speak of. Basically, it was to lower the sails and rely on the inertia to collide with the enemy's ship from the side. Then, throw out the hook and climb up the enemy's ship along the rope, and start a bloody and cruel hand-to-hand battle. The winner would get everything, and the loser would be captured and locked in the cabin, waiting to be sold to slave traders when the ship docked at the port. However, because Joanna's ship was relatively small, she suffered a great loss when they collided. Many unlucky people fell into the sea. On the other hand, the enemy's warship only shook slightly and then began to use the advantage of the high ground to jump down and kill. In the blink of an eye, about half of the sailors on the deck were lying in pools of blood, their fates unknown. Throughout the entire process, Zhang Cheng stood at the side and watched. He had no intention of making a move. He discovered that Captain Ryan wasn't a psychic, but a necromancer from the underground world. This was especially true for the living corpses that had been embalmed with magic. Every single one of them had perfectly retained their abilities from when they were alive. Dealing with ordinary sailors was like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. No wonder so many people were scared out of their wits. Surrender or die. Make your choice. Ryan stood at the edge of the deck and gave an ultimatum. Obviously, he wasn't as cruel and bloodthirsty as the rumors said, and he didn't want to do too much unnecessary killing. After all, in this era where labor was extremely scarce, the price of a healthy slave was quite high. Moreover, Joanna was a beautiful girl of noble birth. If he brought her to the eastern continent and sold her, he believed that many lords would be willing to pay a high price. Seeing that the remaining survivors on the deck were scared out of their wits by the other party's imposing manner, Zhang Chen calmly stood up and said with a playful expression, "Surrender? Are you going to surrender to us? Go, kill him." Ryan obviously didn't like people provoking him. He directly gave the order to his subordinates and the living corpses to kill. But before those ferocious pirates could react, the corpses that were originally under his control immediately turned their spearheads and began to attack their companions in a frenzy. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of people died on the spot. Even Ryan himself was forced to retreat. He tried to regain control of the ship several times, but in the end, he failed. Helplessly, he could only retreat while casting soul spells to weaken the living corpses that were attacking him. He looked battered and exhausted. He didn't want to kill me? Why don't you do it? Zhang Cheng used a short-distance blink, directly crossing the height difference between the two ships and suddenly appearing beside the other party. His tone was filled with mockery. "Let me go. I'm willing to give all my wealth to you and pledge my loyalty to you." Ryan staggered and rolled on the ground to avoid the attack of the living corpses and shouted. At this moment, he realized that the extremely young man in front of him was actually a spellcaster who was countless times stronger than himself. He immediately opened his mouth to beg for mercy. As for pride and integrity, what was that? Was it edible? In this era where survival was extremely difficult, surviving was more important than anything else. Even becoming a lowly slave was 100 times better than dying with pride. Life was precious, but the value of love was even higher. If it was for freedom, both could be given up. Such a sentence could only be written by those idiotic poets who didn't have to worry about food and clothing and only knew how to moan for no reason. When faced with a real-life crisis, their actions were often uglier than ordinary people. Pledge loyalty? Sorry, I don't have the final say in this matter. Zhang Cheng pretended to spread out his hands helplessly. Then he asked the girl who was still standing on the ground below, "Dear Captain, this guy said that he wants to surrender and is willing to give up all his treasures and pledge his loyalty to you. Are you willing to accept?" "No, I won't accept. I want to cut off his head." Looking at the dead servants on the deck, Joanna's eyes turned slightly red. Her eyes revealed undisguised hatred. "Sorry, my captain isn't willing to accept your conditions, so please go to hell." Zhang Cheng casually stretched out a finger. In an instant, a shocking amount of negative energy penetrated Ryan's body. He didn't even have time to scream before a large amount of black blood flowed out from his nostrils, eyes, and mouth. He fell face up on the deck and didn't move at all. Chapter 961. Ryan's inexplicable death directly caused the remaining living crew members of the Sea Snake to collapse. Some threw away their weapons and knelt on the ground to surrender, while others jumped into the sea with wooden buckets, trying to escape as far as possible. By the time Joanna climbed onto the deck of the big ship, there were less than 100 captives left on the whole ship, as well as more than 30 motionless living corpses. The scene of corpses strewn all over the place and the pungent smell of blood made the two ships look like purgatory. Intestines, organs, and brains flowed all over the place, causing the young lady to retch uncontrollably. There was no other way. She had been protected too well since she was a child, so she did not understand how cruel the outside world was. However, as the first mate, old Banku immediately approached and asked in a low voice, "Your Excellency, what should we do next with this ship and the remaining pirates? What do you think?" Zhang Cheng kicked the ball back to old Banku with a faint smile. "I think we can recruit them. After all, the Sea Snake is a big ship. We can't drive it with just a few of us. Then, we can sail to the nearest port and sell the treasure and the original boat," old Banku carefully suggested. He was not an idiot. He knew that his young lady was actually a puppet. The one who had the right to make the decision was the mysterious and dangerous man in front of him. Not only could he release hot flames that could roast people into charred corpses, but he could also seize control of living corpses and quietly kill a notorious pirate like Ryan. To be exact, as long as Zhang Cheng was still on this ship, no one would dare to disobey his will. With hundreds of years of evolution after the disaster, most people had long forgotten the previous concept of freedom and equality. Instead, it was replaced by a strong desire for power, wealth, and great power. No one would be stupid enough to go against a person who had unparalleled supernatural power, and they would not think that they could rely on inciting public opinion to make the owner of great power yield. On the contrary, after entering the new era, things like massacring a city and genocide were as simple as eating and drinking water. Not convinced? Riot? Revolt? Just one word. Kill. Kill them all. Kill them all. If there was a family, he would kill them. One city was massacring another. When an individual's strength reached a certain critical point, numbers could no longer form an overwhelming advantage like before. As long as the masters of supernatural forces were willing, they had too many ways to take revenge on the civilians who rebelled against their rule. The leaders who took the lead couldn't possibly escape death. So over time, the people at the bottom had developed a habit of submitting to them. Looking at the reverence and fear in the old man's eyes, Zhang Cheng nodded casually. "Sure. As for these trivial matters, you can do as you see fit. Also, I'll leave those living corpses under your command. If any of the captives dares to cause trouble, it'll be Shi Guang and the others. I don't wish for the wanderers to disturb my rest. Understood?" "Understood. Don't worry. I guarantee that none of them will dare to cause trouble. In this sea, the strong have always been the king. The weak either kneel on the ground obediently and submit, or become cold corpses." Old Banku placed one hand on his chest and bowed respectfully. Then, he turned around and began to command his surviving subordinates to screen the captives. First, he pulled out the ordinary pirates as slaves, while those with positions were temporarily locked up. After a period of time, he would consider whether to release them for his own use. One must know that ordinary pirates, no matter how fierce they were, would not have much leadership ability due to their lack of knowledge and experience. There was no need to worry too much about them gathering together to start a rebellion. However, those veterans with positions were different. They had experienced too much and had a certain amount of prestige among the ordinary pirates. With a little carelessness, they could unite a group of people. Even if they didn't start a rebellion, they would rope in their former companions to form a separatist force. Admiring the old man commanding the coolies to throw the corpses into the sea and use the seawater to wash the traces of battle on the deck, Zhang Cheng nodded in satisfaction. Ignoring the girl who was still vomiting beside the railing, he walked into the captain's room of the Sea Serpent alone. After a while, he found a silver badge with the capital letter F printed on it from a locked wooden box. Sure enough, he's a feudal lord. I didn't expect that after so many years, the council is still the same. Even the things used to identify their identities haven't changed. Casually throwing the silver badge aside, Zhang Cheng took out the satellite phone from his magic waist bag that had been strengthened by countless runes and dialed the only number on it. After a few seconds, a familiar voice came through the phone. "Master, is that you?" "Ah, that's right, it's me, Adam. How have you been these years?" Zhang Cheng greeted with a chuckle. Perhaps a few hundred years was too long for mortals who only had a lifespan of 50 to 60 years. But for people who had almost immortal life, it was just a blink of an eye. There was no need to ask to know that the intelligence agency he founded back then was the only organization on this planet that had preserved all the technology, knowledge, treatment, and some industrial capabilities before the disaster. They could even relaunch artificial satellites every few decades to ensure the normal operation of the communication and monitoring system. "I'm doing great. I'm even beginning to understand the complex emotions of human beings. In addition, according to your request, I have completed a study on human genetic mutations in the past few hundred years. Do you want me to send it to you immediately?" Adam, as always, showed perfect obedience and immediately changed the topic to his mission. Zhang Cheng refused without thinking. "No, there's no need to be so anxious. I have a small problem now that I need your help." "Adam, please tell me. Give me a map of the North American continent, preferably including the towns and villages. Although there are no signs of the gods awakening yet, I have a hunch that those guys must be hiding in the dark and planning something." Zhang Cheng touched his chin and made a meaningful request. "Got it. Please give me 2 days to organize the information and I'll send it to your phone later." "Very good. Continue to monitor. If you find any signs of faith or miracles, inform me immediately." After saying this, Zhang Cheng directly hung up the phone and stuffed it into the pocket of the captain's coat. As a titan whose mind was full of dark thoughts, he didn't believe that the gods could continue to sleep peacefully after such a terrible disaster on Earth. It could even be said that after the destruction and restart of civilization, there must be some unspeakable conspiracy behind this. Chapter 962. Port Gellant was located at the southernmost tip of the eastern continent of New North America. According to the original border, it should be part of the Mexican state of Oaxaca. Most of it had a tropical mountainous climate. However, as a large number of asteroids fell from the sky, the side near the coastline was completely flattened and turned into a plain and basin. It could be used to grow corn, sugarcane, tobacco, and other crops. The higher part could be used to graze cattle and sheep. Not only could it provide a stable source of food to feed the large population, but it also greatly promoted the prosperity of trade. As the jewel of this land, Port Gellant had a population of more than 50,000. Most of them were mixed-blood Latinos, with a small portion of them being slaves sold from other places. Among them, there were white and black people. Occasionally, one could even see elves with pointy ears, as well as ferocious orcs. There was no doubt that these strange-looking humanoid creatures were invaders who came to Earth from the other side of the Dark Portal. However, the terrible disaster destroyed all the portals, causing them to have no way to return to their own world. They were forced to integrate into the world. In the distant South America, the Nagas even established their own empire. The orcs of the East Asian island countries had also invaded the Korean peninsula and established a primitive tribal alliance in the bitter cold Far East region that was half nomadic and half agricultural. As for the elves, due to the fact that they entered the world relatively late, their population was relatively small. Most of them were hidden in the depths of the barren Amazon tropical forest. They would rarely appear in the human world, unless they were accidentally captured and sold as slaves to the powerful people as playthings. Of course, these were all for Zhang Cheng. At this moment, he was standing on the deck, watching from afar as Banku negotiated with a guy who looked like an official. The two of them talked for a few minutes before the old man stuffed a few coins made of gold into the other person's pocket. After that, he shouted at the sea serpent, "Your Excellency, we have obtained permission to enter the port. We could go ashore now." "Sounds like good news. Zhang Chang shrugged nonchalantly and gestured to the red-haired girl next to him. Ladies first. Thank you. You look like a gentleman. He's even 10 times better than those so-called aristocrats. Joanna winked playfully. Under her strong self-regulation, she finally walked out of the shadow of fear of her first massacre and became cheerful again. Wow, was this a compliment in disguise? I'm deeply honored. Zhang Cheng pretended to be elegant as he squeezed her hand and gently kissed the back of her hand. Please keep it up. Perhaps I will consider inviting you to my room one evening in the future to discuss art, poetry, and philosophy. Joanna's face was covered with a faint blush, and her tone was full of flirtatious hints. One must know that the so-called discussion of art, poetry, and philosophy has always been a cover-up. A man and a woman alone in a room in the middle of the night. Could they really talk about art, poetry, and philosophy for the whole night? Unless there is something wrong with their sexual orientation, they would probably end up in bed and spend a crazy and beautiful night together. Leaving the dirty and smelly dock, the group of people soon came to a noisy hotel. The hotel was filled with smoke from the burning tobacco, the sweat of the rude customers, and the cheap perfume of the scantily clad women. Joanna, who had been spoiled since she was a child, sneezed a few times in one breath. There was no doubt that she was not used to such an environment. If old Banksy had not warned her not to cover her mouth and nose, she would have taken out her handkerchief to get rid of the disgusting smell. In contrast, Zhang Cheng was much calmer, because from the moment he entered the room, he had automatically blocked his sense of smell and taste. In fact, since he had seen the terrible sanitary conditions and dark cuisine of Azeroth and the Song of Ice and Fire world, this was nothing. At least there was no human meat in the food they ate. After passing through the noisy hall, the group sat down near a corner. Without saying anything, old Banksy went directly to the bar and paid more than 20 silver coins. Then, together with two girls who looked to be 16 or 17 years old, he put the hot food on the table and said in a rather helpless tone, "Sorry, there's only simple stew and bad wine here. Please eat first. After I understand the situation in the city, we will change to a slightly better hotel." What? Is there someone who dares to trouble us? Joanna's eyes widened in disbelief. Captain, this is not the Chain Pearl Islands, nor is it the orderly Western continent. This is the Eastern continent, where there are wars almost every day. Whether it is between gangs, adventurers, pirates, or lords of all sizes, there will be fierce conflicts every once in a while. If we rush in without understanding the situation, we are likely to be besieged. After all, outsiders are not very welcome here. In their eyes, guys like us who have no reputation are similar to fat sheep. Old Banksy explained patiently. Then, how are you going to find out? Joanna asked curiously. Banksy replied without thinking. It's very simple. Spend a little money, buy those drunkards a drink, and chat a little. I believe that I can gather enough confidence before dark. As for you, it's best to stay by Sir Zhang Cheng's side. Otherwise, a young and beautiful girl like you will easily attract unnecessary trouble if you act alone. I see. The girl nodded thoughtfully. Banksy immediately bought a bottle of the strongest rum from the bartender after dealing with Joanna, a newbie who didn't know anything. He then found an old drunkard and bought him a few drinks. As the alcohol began to take effect in their blood vessels, the two quickly became familiar with each other and began to talk about various interesting things that happened in the city. The experienced old man soon obtained a lot of useful information by beating around the bush. Then, the second, the third, and the fourth in just an hour or so, he had talked to more than half of the locals in the inn. His efficiency was frighteningly high. Just as Joanna pricked up her ears, tried to figure out what Banksy was talking about with those people, a group of men with all kinds of weapons in their hands suddenly burst in through the door. The man in the lead was carrying a heavy battle axe, and he roared loudly. "Who is the owner of the large warship docked at the pier? Come out." "Haha, trouble has finally come to us. I knew that there would be some repercussions after killing the undead captain, Ryan." Zhang Cheng retorted while holding his chin and the corners of his mouth raised slightly, revealing an undisguised playfulness. Chapter 963. Their upper bodies were naked, and their lower bodies were covered in tattered linen shorts. Their feet were covered in blackened wooden shoes. These guys who came out of nowhere looked like laborers at the docks, but the weapons in their hands were horrifying. Many of them had large black stains on them. Needless to say, the black stains were left behind by dry blood. Without a doubt, this group of people were out-and-out desperados. They didn't care about other people's lives, and they didn't care about their own lives either. After all, the generals of the disaster had caused the entire world's civilization system to regress by more than 1,000 years. The living environment was unimaginably bad. Therefore, for many people, instead of being oppressed, it was better to risk their lives and fight. At the very least, they could live happily for a few days after winning. As for the future, they could slowly think about it. After today, there was no tomorrow for most people. What should we do now? Joanna subconsciously tightened her grip on her weapon and asked in a low voice. What else can we do? Of course, we have to kill them all. Use their corpses to warn everyone in Port Gelent that we are not to be trifled with. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhang Cheng stood up from his chair. Without saying a word, he raised his hand and released a pyroblast. Boom! A blazing fireball exploded in the middle of the crowd. Including the innocent customers, at least 17 or 18 people were thrown into the air by this attack. They crashed heavily into the ceiling and walls, dying horribly. They were almost unrecognizable. It was important to note that this was the result of greatly limiting the power of the spell. Otherwise, the entire Port Gelent would have been blasted into the sky by this pyroblast. As a titan who had the power to easily destroy a planet, even the most ordinary and low-level magic could produce a destructive power that was unimaginable to mortals. The Azeroth cataclysm caused by Deathwing was not even an appetizer to the Titans. Damn it, that's a mutant. Quick, charge and kill him first. After a brief moment of shock, the leader immediately raised his axe and shouted as he rushed forward. He opened his mouth to reveal a mouthful of black and yellow teeth. But before the axe in his hand could land, a slightly smaller fireball smashed into his hideous face. The next second, like a kite with a broken string, the poor guy flew back more than 10 meters, crashing into countless tables and chairs before finally collapsing to the ground and taking his last breath. As for his face, it had been completely charred by the scorching flames, revealing the chilling bones and reddish-black muscles underneath. Zhangqing acted as though he had done something insignificant. He didn't even look at the corpse on the ground and directly ordered the pirates who were standing in a daze, "What are you waiting for? Kill the rest of the enemies and hang their bodies outside to dry. Kill, die, get lost if you have nothing to do with this." The people who made a living on the sea were not good people. Therefore, after recovering from the shock, they immediately rushed up and surrounded those guys who were still arrogant a few seconds ago and started a cruel and bloody massacre. This was especially true for the pirates who had originally surrendered. Now that they were in a favorable position, each one of them was fiercer than the other. In a short while, the dozen or so enemies who had come looking for trouble were all killed, leaving only one alive symbolically. Old Banku directly dragged this unlucky guy to a corner and cut off one of his fingers without any superfluous words. Then he laughed nastily and asked loudly, "Speak. Who are you? What do you have to do with the undead captain, Ryan?" Bah. The captive seemed rather unyielding and directly spat. Hee hee. Very good. Very good. I like tough guys the most. Ross, take out your treasure and let this tough guy enjoy it. Banku turned around and waved at a pirate who was about 40 years old and blind in one eye. After a few days of getting along, most of the pirates who had surrendered had already chosen to accept their fate and even took the initiative to display their abilities. In any case, it didn't matter who they worked for. As long as their income didn't decrease, they didn't care who the captain was. "As you wish." The one-eyed pirate called Ross stepped forward and carefully took out a super mini saw that was only as thick as a toothpick and had jagged edges from his pocket. Then he took off the captive's pants and stuffed this thing into an indescribable hole and began to pull back and forth like a fine craftsman. Instantly, blood splattered everywhere. The captive, who had been very unyielding a few seconds ago, suddenly screamed like a pig being slaughtered. No, stop. I beg you to stop. One had to know that this was the part of the human body where the nerves were the most concentrated. One could imagine how sensitive it was. Even getting hit by it would be extremely painful, let alone this extremely sick and twisted torture. Beg for mercy? Weren't you very tough just now? Old Banku sneered and mocked. Sorry, no tough guy can last more than a minute in my hands. Ross obviously had some problems in his heart, and an expression of incomparable enjoyment appeared on his face. With the cooperation of the two, the captive quickly told them everything he knew. Roughly half an hour later, the crew returned to the cabin of the Sea Serpent and began to discuss how to deal with the enemies that had suddenly appeared. According to the results of the interrogation, including the undead Captain Ryan and the people we killed today, all of them were working for an organization called the Hermit Order. Ryan was in charge of plundering merchant ships, while the people who died today were in charge of disposing of the goods and slaves, providing sufficient financial resources for the Hermit Order. As for what exactly the Hermit Order does, we still don't know for sure. Old Banklo briefly explained the information he obtained from his interrogation. The Hermit Order? Joanna's eyes revealed a doubtful look. She had never heard of such a mysterious organization, nor had she read about it in her family's numerous books. Old Bankin nodded seriously. That's right. The Hermit Order. According to the information we have, this organization has only risen in recent years. They have considerable strength in the Eastern continent and are constantly purchasing children under the age of 10. I suggest that we leave before they react. Leave? Why should we leave? Just the opposite. Not only can we not leave, but we also have to uproot this organization called the Hermit Order. After all, if you want to make a name for yourself in this sea, the best way is to find a powerful enemy and then establish your reputation through slaughter, destruction, and destruction. Zhang Cheng put forward a completely opposite opinion in a meaningful manner. Leave? What a joke. He had been roaming the Earth's orbit for hundreds of years, all for the sake of finding the sleeping gods. Now that the Hermit Order was purchasing children under the age of 10, it was obviously suspected that they were cultivating followers. It was very likely that a certain god was behind this. Chapter 964. Adam, have you heard of the Hermit Order? After returning to his cabin, Zhang Cheng immediately dialed the satellite phone and contacted the cyborgs in charge of monitoring the situation on Earth. Theoretically speaking, it was impossible to maintain absolute secrecy when it came to spreading faith. No matter how careful one was, there would always be some unavoidable loopholes. Among them, purchasing children whose worldview had yet to be established was the most noteworthy point. The reason was simple. It was basically the same as how some religions had parents bring their children to worship together and participate in various brainwashing activities, thus creating an irreversible influence on them. Children who grew up in such an environment would naturally choose to support the religion they were raised in and the God that the religion worshipped. In short, to obtain devout faith, one needed to create an environment where believers could interact with each other. Normally speaking, unless the scale was extremely small, there is a certain chance that a secret meeting would be discovered by the outside world. Hermit Order? Adam on the electronic screen frowned, seemingly thinking about something. After 2 to 3 minutes, he sent over a set of information and explained with a heavy voice. The Hermit Order is an organization that started its activities 6 years ago. Initially, they were very small and did not attract my attention. However, they quickly developed in North America. Currently, they control over 10 pirate ships, 2 important ports, as well as a large number of bandits and gang members. What is it? Did they attract your attention in any way? Yes. From what I know, this organization has been purchasing children under the age of 10. Don't tell me that this alone is not worthy of our attention. Zhang Cheng asked straightforwardly. He could not believe that Adam, who had never made a mistake before, would make such a huge mistake. My apologies, Master. I don't think this is something worth paying attention to. You might not know this, but the current world is no longer the same as before the asteroid impact. Things like human trafficking are nothing. According to my rough calculations, the current world population is about 470 million, and slaves make up more than 40 million. In other words, they're an average of 3 million people being sold like livestock every year. There are countless organizations and individuals that sell children like this all over the world. Adam calmly explained the cruel reality of the world. 3 million every year? Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows in surprise. Adam immediately nodded. Yes, 1,300,000. Of course, this was only the number of transactions. It did not refer to the 3 million people who were forced to become slaves every year. Many of them were transferred from one slave owner to another. However, since you're interested in the Hermit Order, I'll be focusing my attention on them. If there's anything suspicious, I'll inform you immediately. Well, it seems that the new era is much worse than I expected. Maybe we should speed up the evolution of civilization a little. Zhang Cheng stroked his chin thoughtfully. There is no doubt that due to the current cruel living environment, as well as the terrible traffic and public security situation, it was not an easy job to find the gods hiding in the dark. However, if a few powerful conquerors were to establish a few powerful empires around the world, greatly improving the agricultural and technological standards, then the population would rapidly increase. At that time, it would not be so easy to secretly spread the religion. Thinking of this, he immediately pulled out a map of the distribution of the major forces around the world and began to look for candidates. He planned to support them and make them the emperors of empires one after another. Of course, he didn't intend to give up on the Hermit Order either. He was prepared to follow this lead and investigate it thoroughly. Time flew by. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. After resting for half a month in Port Gerland, Joanna finally couldn't stand the loneliness and boredom anymore. She piloted the Sea Serpent and returned to the boundless sea. She planned to plunder passing merchant ships along the northern route, and then go to Port Manches in the north to take a look at the famous Colosseum. The reason why it was famous was because the competition held here was not like other places where slave gladiators fought each other. At most, they would add some lions, tigers, bears, and other ferocious beasts. Instead, it was a competition where magical beasts from another world fought with humans. The degree of brutality and bloodshed here was many times higher than the former. Almost every participant possessed powerful supernatural abilities. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to defeat a monster that was 20 to 30 times their size. Just as Zhang Cheng was sitting alone on the deck and enjoying the refreshing sea breeze blowing across his face, he suddenly heard the lookout shouting at the top of his lungs. Target spotted on the port side. It's a merchant ship. What? A merchant ship? Joanna's eyes instantly shone with excitement. After all, she had never successfully robbed a merchant ship ever since she announced that she was going to become a pirate. So, she immediately became excited. Similarly, the pirates who were busy on the deck were also unusually excited. To them, successfully plundering a merchant ship not only meant that they would be able to get a generous share of the spoils of war, but they would also be able to have a sumptuous meal and drink unlimited amounts of fine wine after the battle. Soon, with more and bigger sails and a streamlined hull, the crew of the Sea Serpent finally saw a medium-sized merchant ship that was nearly half their size appear on the horizon in the distance. However, even though it was small, the belly of the ship was exceptionally round. It was obviously designed to carry more goods, and its sailing speed was extremely slow. As the distance between the two sides got closer and closer, the pirates could even see the desperate expressions of the sailors on the other side's deck. "Ha ha! Look at those poor bastards. They're about to pee their pants." Ross, who had just been promoted to bosun, opened his mouth and laughed unscrupulously. "We're really lucky. We actually managed to capture a defenseless merchant ship. I hope the goods on it won't be too disappointing. T. This is a medium-sized cargo ship. Even if it's filled with the most worthless food, we'll still be able to make a fortune." Accompanied by the clamor of the pirates, it was as if they had already seen the other side as a meal on their plate. They could not wait to rush up and take a bite out of it. However, The owner of the merchant ship was not a fool. He began to loudly order his subordinates to throw the heavy boxes of goods into the sea in an attempt to reduce the weight and increase the speed of the ship. Otherwise, if they were caught, they would definitely not have a good ending. However, before they could throw out much, the experienced pirates of the Sea Serpent used the ballista at the bow of the ship to shoot arrows with ropes at the ends. Then, with the help of the winch, they forcefully closed the distance between the two ships. Then, with extremely skilled movements, they completed the jump and rushed up to kill the sailors who tried to resist. In less than 10 minutes, they had taken control of the entire ship. Chapter 965. Unbelievable! This is actually a cargo ship transporting coconut wine and iron ingots. Ha ha! We're rich. Yeah, just the dozens of tons of iron ingots alone are worth a lot of money. I can't believe we're so lucky. Don't forget about the coconut wine. I can't wait to open a barrel and drink. As soon as Zhang Cheng boarded the deck of the merchant ship, he heard the excited cheers of the surrounding pirates. After all, not every time they attacked a merchant ship, they would be able to reap such great rewards. Especially the wooden barrels filled with coconut wine piled up in the warehouse. It was simply a fatal temptation for those who have been drifting on the sea for a long time. Many old pirates would rather not eat for a whole day just to drink a little bit of the wine and let the alcohol numb their nerves. After all, their lives were so difficult that they did not know when they would die because of a small matter. Therefore, wine was an indispensable part of their lives. Joanna glanced at the sailors and merchants kneeling on the deck, their eyes filled with despair. She deliberately raised her chin and pretended to be arrogant and asked, "Which one of you is the owner of this ship?" "It's me." A middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s with neatly combed hair carefully raised his head and replied, "Which chamber of commerce do you belong to?" Joanna stared at the man and continued to ask, "As a noble lady." The biggest difference between her and the ordinary pirates was that she knew which chamber of commerce could be provoked and which could not be touched. Otherwise, she would die without a burial place. This was especially true for the several royal families of the Western continent. Each of them had a large number of loyal and powerful mutants. Once they were angered, they would immediately bring about terrible revenge. Pelican Chamber of Commerce. Please don't hurt me. I'm willing to write a letter to my family and ask them to pay an additional 3,000 gold coins as ransom. The middle-aged man's voice was full of fear. He had recognized the infamous Sea Serpent. No matter who the current owner of this ship was, he must be more powerful than the undead Captain Ryan. "Okay, I accept your conditions." Joanna nodded seriously, then ordered the pirate next to her, "Go, prepare a slightly better cabin for this gentleman. Deliver food and water on time every day. Don't let anything happen to him." "Hee hee. Don't worry, Captain, this is 3,000 gold coins. Even if I have to starve myself, I won't let him go hungry." The bearded man grinned as he escorted the merchant to the bottom of the ship and locked him up. As for the remaining sailors who were unable to pay the high ransom, they had two choices. They could either join the pirates and become a member of the ship, or be locked up and sold as slaves to merchants of the next port. In fact, due to the extreme scarcity of labor, the slave trade was flourishing all over the world, and most people were used to it. It had nothing to do with good and evil or morality. It was just a stage that a civilization had to go through in its evolution. Without a doubt, almost all of the sailors on the merchant ships had chosen to become pirates instead of slaves. The reason was very simple. Pirates could at least control their own fate, but once they became slaves, they would have to live under the whims of their masters for the rest of their lives. If they were lucky enough to meet a less tyrannical master, they might be able to live peacefully until they were about 50 years old. However, if he met a pervert who tortured people for the sake of torturing them, he would probably suffer a fate worse than death. Of course, it wasn't easy being a pirate. When the next boarding battle arrived, they would be used as cannon fodder and be the first batch to board the enemy's ship. Unless they killed at least a few enemies and survived, they would still end up as the lowest slave workers on the ship. After receiving the list of goods on the merchant ship, Joanna asked Zhang Cheng with a smug smile, "What do you think of our first job?" Not bad. After we sell all the goods, I believe you won't have to worry about money for a long time, Zhang Cheng replied casually. Obviously, he wasn't interested in this robbery at all, and didn't care about how much profit he would get. What about you? Half of this money is yours. Joanna ran her fingers through her fiery red hair and winked playfully. Me? If nothing unexpected happens, we will have to part ways after we reach Port Manches. Zhang Cheng straightforwardly expressed his intentions. The Hermit Order. This mysterious organization had always given him an inexplicable desire to investigate it. According to the information provided by Adam, the Hermit Order first appeared in Port Manches. Although they kept expanding towards the south, as the place where they first appeared, there must be some unspeakable secrets hidden. Leave? Why? Joanna's originally smiling face suddenly revealed a shocked expression. I have some important personal matters to deal with. Furthermore, haven't you already awakened your own power? Haven't you? Zhang Cheng stared into the girl's eyes with a smile that wasn't a smile. Joanna's expression changed slightly. When did you find out? From the moment you awakened your power. All right, let's end this topic here so that we won't feel awkward. Let me give you one last piece of advice. Don't be overconfident with your beauty and wisdom. Not all men think with their lower body, and not all men are idiots who will be fooled by your little tricks. After saying those meaningful words, Zhang Cheng pursed his lips into a playful smile and disappeared into the dark cabin. Naive, cute, kind, and beautiful noble lady? Don't be an idiot. The elites of this world's ruling class had decided that although they might be crazy, greedy, cruel, and cunning, they would never be stupid. Joanna's seemingly harmless appearance was in fact a result of her deliberate act. Even in front of her loyal servants, she had been putting on an act, pretending to be kind, naughty, and rebellious. To put it bluntly, she had created a persona for herself and treated life as an act. Only in this way could she gain the favor of her father and let her ambitious siblings let down their guard and not treat her as a threat. But unfortunately, for Zhang Cheng, who could directly read other people's thoughts, no matter how good her acting was, it was useless. Bastard! How dare he? Joanna clenched her fists tightly, her eyes shooting out terrifying flames of anger. The sweet smile on her face became distorted. But soon, she regained her usual elegant and charming expression, muttering to herself in a voice that only she could hear, "No one can reject me. You will pay the price for this. A very heavy price." Chapter 966. The two of them had not spoken a word ever since they had seen through the disguise of the blessed daughter of heaven. Such a strange situation made everyone, including old Banksy, feel a strong sense of uneasiness. They were eager to find out what was going on between the two of them. Would there be a split or a fight on the ship? If it really happened, which side should they stand on? Fortunately, their worries were all unnecessary. The expected infighting did not happen until they arrived at Manches port safely. Zhang Cheng did not even collect the spoils of war that should belong to him. He quietly left the sea serpent alone and disappeared into the depths of the chaotic city alleys. He did not know that not long after he left, Joanna had visited the city's most powerful slave owner, known as Smiling Willie. Of course, this nickname was more of a bitter sarcasm than a description. This was because this man who had just celebrated his 50th birthday always had an unfathomable smile on his face no matter what he did, even if he killed his parents with his own hands. No one knew what was going on in his mind, and no one knew whether he was angry, happy, upset, or something else at that moment. Good afternoon, beautiful Miss Joanna Rester. You're just like a blooming rose. Every time you appear, I feel a rush of excitement. Wiley took the girl's hand and gently kissed the back of her hand. Hello, Sir Willie. I hope my sudden visit didn't cause any trouble for you. Joanna politely bowed slightly. No. Why would there be any trouble? On the contrary, your arrival makes me feel like I'm bathing in the warm spring breeze. Willie smiled and complimented her. There was no doubt that they had known each other for a long time and were quite familiar with each other. However, it was not surprising. After all, one of them was the daughter of the overlord family of the Pearl Island chain, and the other was the largest slave owner in Manchesport. They had a close relationship in terms of trade. After the woman in gauze poured the blood-red wine into the glass, Willie took a sip and pretended to ask casually, "You didn't come here today just to visit an old man like me, did you?" "No, of course not. I want to ask you for a favor." Joanna stared at the slightly swaying liquid in the glass and stated her purpose without hesitation. "Oh, what kind of favor?" "I'll say in advance, if it's beyond my ability, I'm afraid I can't help." Willie touched the short beard on his chin and probed. "It's very simple. I hope you can help me deal with a person, a man with a powerful ability. I want to capture him and personally train him into a slave who is willing to die for me." When she said this, Joanna did not hide the hatred in her heart. One had to know that women were never rational creatures, especially women who had been pampered since childhood. Often, small conflicts that were very common in the eyes of ordinary people were considered a great humiliation to them. They had to ruthlessly take revenge. This was the first time Might had seen the other party lose his composure. Surprised, he raised his eyebrows. "Can you tell me, how did this poor guy offend you?" After all, Joanna had been carefully maintaining her image. Except for a few secret collaborators, even her parents and siblings didn't know that this lovely girl was actually a scheming person. "I don't want to say too much. You just need to capture him and send him to me. I believe that for you who controls a third of the city's wealth, it shouldn't be difficult for you to drug his food and drink, right? In return, I can give you something that you've always wanted as a gift." After saying this, Joanna stood up and slowly unbuckled her belt in front of Willie. She took off her clothes and fully displayed the unique charm of a young girl. Obviously, this was a deal, and she used her body as a bargaining chip. It had to be said that she was very good at using the unique advantages of a woman. Although Willie tried to pretend that he didn't care, but that flash of greed in his eyes betrayed him. As an ambitious person who slowly climbed up from the bottom of society, compared to those nobles who were born with a golden spoon in their mouths, he craved for some things even more, including Joanna, who was born with a noble background. Especially when the other party was a young girl who had never had any relations with other men, it gave him an indescribable sense of satisfaction and desire to conquer her. After hesitating for a moment, Willie finally made up his mind and transformed into a wild beast and pounced forward. He didn't know what a terrifying decision he had made. Similarly, he didn't know that this decision would bring him disastrous consequences. On the other side, Zhang Cheng, who had already entered the city, was sitting on the spectator stand of the Colosseum. While reading the memories of the spectators, trying to find clues related to the Hermit Order, he was also admiring the scene of the slave gladiators fighting against the otherworldly beasts. Although the fighting techniques of both sides weren't that good, the primitive, barbaric, bloody, and cruel battle had its own unique flavor. Because both sides didn't have any distracting thoughts, only fighting for survival. In less than 10 minutes, more than 4 gladiators and 3 gigantic beasts had already been killed, glaring blood and internal organs splattered all over the place. Under such a tense and exciting environment, the spectators were also waving their arms in the air, cheering or cursing loudly. The former naturally won money from choosing the right winner, while the latter, without exception, lost a large sum of money. The natural inclination of humans towards taking risks and violence was vividly displayed here. There were even a few highly excited men and women who directly acted out our 18 action movies in the spectator stand. Interesting, it seems that no matter what era it is, people's desires will never disappear. On the contrary, the more primitive the desire is, the more it can stimulate the animal instincts in their subconscious. Just as Zhang Cheng was mumbling to himself in a voice that only he could hear, a dirty boy who looked to be around 14 years old suddenly appeared in front of him and begged with a timid voice, "Mr. Benevolent Mister, can you give me some money? I haven't eaten for 3 days." "I'm sorry, child. I'm afraid I can't help you." Zhang Cheng's eyes revealed a coldness akin to December's winter as he straightforwardly refused. Chapter 967. I beg you. I only need a few copper coins to buy some potatoes or corn. The boy clearly ignored the warning in Zhang Cheng's tone. Not only did he not leave, but he kept moving forward. His whole body was curled up as if he was afraid. If it was a normal person, they would have been deceived by his weak appearance. But Zhang Cheng would not. Just as the boy stepped within 1 meter, he was shocked to find that his feet were frozen to the ground. No matter how hard he tried, his feet could not leave the ground even by an inch. What was even more frightening was that the bone-chilling white ice was quickly spreading up his legs. It would not be long before his entire body would be frozen into a lump of ice. Young man, you have 1 minute to tell me who is the mastermind behind this. After 1 minute, you will become a beautiful ice sculpture. Zhang Cheng did not waste any time and directly gave him an ultimatum, because even if he did not read the boy's thoughts, he could still see some clues from the boy's strange movements. Without a doubt, a normal person would not curl up their body when approaching a target, unless they planned to hide their eyes and movements, and then wait for the moment they approach to launch a surprise attack. Simply put, this boy who pretended to be pitiful was actually an experienced assassin. He specialized in using his identity and age as a cover to attack his target. Unfortunately, if it was in the past where morals and material civilization were more developed, he might have been able to deceive many people. But now it was indeed an extremely dark, cruel, and barbaric society. Anyone who was overflowing with sympathy would not be able to survive for long before being devoured by the cannibalistic environment. See, sir, I think you might have misunderstood something. I'm only a beggar. No one ordered me to do anything. The boy frantically tried to explain. In just a few seconds, the ice had already reached his knees, and the frozen part below had completely lost feeling. 45 seconds left. Zhang Cheng reported the remaining time with a smile that did not seem like a smile. Acting? Sorry. In this world, there were probably not many people whose acting skills could compare to his. In the beginning, in order to survive in this cruel world, it could be said that he had done all kinds of tricks, such as cheating and swindling. He had even done something as unscrupulous as pulling out someone's D*CK. How could a second-rate street artist without professional training deceive an experienced actor who had surpassed the Oscar for Best Actor? Hearing the mocking tone, the boy immediately realized that he had been exposed, and his expression immediately changed. In the end, he did not choose to reveal the mastermind. Instead, he took out a black dagger from his sleeve and threw it forward. However, the moment the sharp blade collided with the skin, the dagger failed to cut through the skin that should have been extremely fragile. Instead, it was as if it had hit a piece of steel. With a clang, the dagger fell to the ground. A wrong choice. But it doesn't matter. I'm not the one who's going to lose my life. As soon as he finished speaking, Zhang Cheng stood up and walked towards the exit of the Colosseum. The boy who was frozen in place behind him was completely wrapped in white ice. At the same time, in the most luxurious manor located halfway up the mountain of Port Manches, Willie was lying in a hot spring. While enjoying the comfort of the hot water, he was admiring the beautiful girl opposite him. He raised the corner of his mouth and suggested, "My dear Joanna, what do you think of me being your husband?" "You?" Joanna used a piece of silk to gently wipe her chest that was full of fingerprints and teeth marks. She smiled and shook her head. "Don't be wishful thinking. My father will never agree. I believe you know very well that his wish is to marry me to the Western continent and form a stable alliance with the nobles. After all, the situation there has been very stable and trade has been flourishing. But didn't you find out already? Don't think that I don't know. You've always been unwilling to be a tool for a family to form a marriage alliance. You thirst for power, wealth, and strength. I can give all of these to you. As long as you marry me, everything I have will be yours. Don't forget, I'm already 50 years old. For a man, I can live for another 10 years at most. When that time comes, you'll only be in your early 30s. You'll definitely be able to achieve great things." Willie spread out his arms, his tone revealing a strong hint. "Ha ha! No, please allow me to refuse. Why do you think I ran away from home? Why did I run away from marriage? Because I'm not willing to be a foil for some man. I am me, the one and only Joanna. No one can ride on my head. All right, don't think too much. I don't mind maintaining an intimate relationship with you, but you have to do something for me. That's all." With that, the girl stroked her fiery red hair and slowly walked out of the hot spring, allowing the maid to wipe her body. She was wearing a loose, translucent robe on the boat. Just as she was about to return to her room to rest and wait for the good news, a loud noise suddenly came from the front hall of the manor. In the next second, asterisk boom, asterisk, a blinding red light shot up into the sky. It directly blew up the front half of the courtyard filled with all sorts of exotic flowers into the sky. Damn it! What happened? Willie hurriedly jumped out of the hot spring, his eyes emitting a terrifying cold light. One had to know that ever since he established himself on this land, it had been many years since anyone dared to provoke him like this. Master, not good. There's a powerful metahuman rushing in from outside. Your subordinates are all dead. The white-haired old butler rushed in, his body trembling as he shouted loudly. Shock, fear, trembling. It wasn't hard to tell from his eyes that the intruder was definitely a terrifying enemy. Willie wasn't an idiot. He immediately looked at Joanna. His face was so gloomy that it was about to drip water. He suddenly realized that this ambitious woman might have caused him to provoke someone that he shouldn't have. So without saying anything, he rushed up and tried to take her down as a bargaining chip. Scram, don't come over. Stay away from me. Joanna wasn't someone to be trifled with either. She immediately raised her right hand and condensed an arrow completely made of fire elements, staring at the other party with vigilance. Tell me, what are you hiding from me? Willie gritted his teeth and questioned. Before Joanna could explain, Zhang Chung walked in from the burning main door and replied with a smile. No, you're wrong. She's not hiding anything. In fact, with her stupid intelligence, she can't understand the power that I have. Chapter 968. Sir, I think there might be some misunderstanding between us. Looking at the extent of the destruction of the garden in front of the manor, Willie's hair stood on end, because he could feel that this was the closest he had been to death in the past 10 years. No matter who the other party was, that unparalleled mysterious power was not something that an ordinary person could contend against. Misunderstanding? Weren't you the one who sent an assassin to assassinate me? Zhang Cheng calmly sat down on a chair, sizing up the other party with great interest. It had to be said that as the largest slave owner in the city, Willie did have some skills. Whether it was personal strength or management, he was far more outstanding than others of his kind. Most importantly, although he had never truly studied systematically, he respected knowledge and books very much, and had been sparing no effort to collect and build a library that belonged to him. In comparison, those lords of the highest council who were immersed in internal strife and had all kinds of violent and plundering thoughts in their minds were like primitive barbarians. Willie smiled bitterly and explained, I don't deny that I gave the order, but you have to understand that I am a man. When a man is tempted, he will often do some irrational things. For this, I am willing to compensate. Zhang Cheng glanced at Joanna, who was wearing a thin robe not far away, and immediately understood. He smiled and sighed, I understand now. Indeed, when a man is controlled by the desire of his lower body, he will often choose to throw his rationality to the back of his mind. It can't be helped. This is determined by the part of the genes that reproduce. It is reasonable that your willpower is weak in this aspect. Thank you for your understanding. Willie was very cunning and immediately bowed deeply. Yielding to someone who was stronger than him was not a shameful thing, especially when he had climbed up from the bottom of society. He knew very well that the so-called dignity and pride were worthless. Only those who survived would have a chance. Only those who survived would have a future. If he died for the so-called dignity and pride, other than being laughed at by others, he would not gain anything. Understanding? No, I am just stating a fact. It does not mean that I am forgiving you. Zhang Cheng laughed and shook his head. Now tell me, what are you going to do with Joanna? I will capture her, throw her into a dirty and smelly slave shed, and let those stinky men rape her repeatedly while she's still alive. I wonder if you're satisfied with this answer? Wiley's eyes flashed with undisguised viciousness, fully demonstrating what it meant to be merciless when it came to pulling out sex. Hearing this, Joanna's face changed, and she roared angrily. "You lowly pig! How dare you? My father will." "I'm sorry, my dear, but I'm afraid your father will never find you here. Even if he finds you, he won't admit that you're the daughter of the Rester family." Mike cracked his signature smile. In the next second, a seemingly harmless female slave suddenly swung the clay pot in her hand at lightning speed from behind and smashed it on Joanna's head. Bang! As expected, she fell straight to the ground and fainted. At the same time, a group of fully armed slave warriors went straight to the place where the Sea Snake's crew was resting and started a tragic massacre. Not a single person escaped alive. Needless to say, this was to silence Joanna and completely erase all traces of her visit to the manor. Apart from that, the pirates on the ships docked at the port would probably not be able to escape. Before law and order were fully established, violence was the biggest factor that determined the ownership of this world. As long as there was enough military support, even if more than half of the Earth population was slaughtered, no one would dare to stand up and resist. In the ancient history of mankind, the Mongols had successfully done it once. Later on, there were even people who called the executioner Temujin, who often treated slaughter as a game, a genius of his generation, and constantly glorified him in various movies and television works. From this, it could be seen that good and evil, morality, and law were all bullshit. At least in the face of powerful violence, they were as fragile as newborn babies. About half an hour later, the pitiful girl was placed in front of hundreds of slaves who were being trained. Following the instructor's command, these young and strong men pounced on her as if they had gone mad, putting on a tragic scene. Pain, despair. She couldn't even commit suicide. Relying on the strong endurance of a woman, Joanna managed to endure this horrifying torture for a full 5 hours before she finally breathed her last. During the entire process, Willie kept secretly observing Zhang Cheng's reaction from the corner of his eyes, only to find that the other party's expression didn't change at all, as if he was just enjoying the show. Without a doubt, this kind of calm attitude made his heart tremble in fear, because from that pair of eyes, one could see coldness and extreme disdain for life. To put it simply, he didn't see people as people at all. One had to know that even as a great slave owner, he could not completely do this. Looking at the slaves who hadn't bathed for who knows how many days, and who were still venting on the cold corpses, Zhang Cheng suddenly turned his head and asked, "You're working for the Hermit Order?" "What?" Willie instantly trembled. "The Hermit Order? Don't tell me you've never heard of this organization?" Zhang Cheng smiled meaningfully. Obviously, this was an unexpected surprise. Not even in his wildest dreams did he think that he would be able to find clues about the Hermit Order in this guy's memories. After all, reading someone's memories wasn't an easy task. It was like reading a book full of accounts. Even if you read 10 lines at a time, it would still take you a long time to finish reading them all. "Sir, I think it's better for us to talk about compensation." Willie subconsciously licked his lips. His entire body became abnormally tense. "Aha! Seems like I was right. Tell me what exactly happened between you and the Hermit Order. As long as your answer satisfies me, I'll let you go." Zhang Cheng lightly tapped the table with his finger. "The Hermit Order's power is beyond your imagination. If you don't want to die, it's best not to be too curious." Willie's cautious attitude from before was replaced with a hint of threat. "Ha! Fine, if you don't want to talk about it, I won't force you. Let me see for myself." Zhang Cheng lightly sighed, then suddenly reached his hand out without any warning, pressed it on Willie's face, and began to invade his memories. In just a few seconds, this pitiful guy's entire body was spasming with white foam coming out of his mouth, turning him into a complete idiot. The side effect of forcefully invading the brain was quite severe, especially the more the target resisted, the more severe the damage to the brain would be. Chapter 9:69. In the evening, a light drizzle continued to fall from the sky, bringing a sense of tranquility to this land of violence and savagery. In this kind of weather, even the most diligent of bandits wouldn't easily venture out, so all the traveling merchants hurriedly made use of their time to travel. even if the muddy road would bring them a lot of unnecessary trouble, even if the rain could cause them to catch a cold or have a fever. After all, after the Great Calamity, humanity had already lost the industrial technology to manufacture antibiotics. Even a slight cold or fever could be fatal. Furthermore, an infected wound was an incurable disease that had a fatality rate of over 70%. However, for Zhang Cheng, this light drizzle didn't affect his mood at all. Instead, he felt like he was going on an excursion, especially since the group he was leading was currently heading toward a small city that used to be in the middle of America. The closer they got to their destination, the more nervous the mercenaries in the group became, ready for battle at the slightest sign of trouble. "Sir, from now on, we've entered the city of the old age. You better be careful. There are a lot of monsters here. Quite a few people who went in with the intention of making a fortune never came out alive." A black man wearing leather armor and wielding a sharp spear suddenly reminded him. "Monsters? Ha! No, you're wrong. What's truly scary are never monsters, but humans," Zhang Cheng replied meaningfully. Quite obviously, by forcefully invading Willie's mind, he had found out the true hiding place of the Hermit Order, which was this city that was abandoned several hundred years ago. At a certain hidden location in the city, there was an air raid shelter built during the Cold War era in the USA. All the children that were bought were sent inside. As for what exactly was going on inside, no one knew, as Willie's rank obviously wasn't enough to touch the core secrets of the Hermit Order. There was no need to ask to know that the so-called monsters in the city were all the work of the Hermit Order. They didn't want anyone to come close, so they fabricated such rumors to prevent more people from coming in. After all, things from before the Great Calamity were nothing short of miraculous for the current extremely backward level of productivity. Among them, perfectly preserved firearms were worth quite a bit, not to mention the large amount of gold and jewels that remained. Generally speaking, every time a city was discovered that had not been plundered, countless greedy people would be transported there without exception. But the Hermit Order relied on their ruthless nature to forcefully suppress their greed. If it weren't for Zhang Cheng paying such a high price, these mercenaries wouldn't have risked their lives to approach this place. That's right. He was the real monster. Look at this world. It is said that it was because humans were too arrogant in the past that they angered the supreme gods. As a result, a terrible disaster befell them, and everything they created was destroyed overnight. Another young man, who was obviously Latino and had a wheat-colored complexion, chimed in excitedly. "Hey, don't spread your ridiculous arguments in front of the employer. There was no God in this world. All the gods are lies made up by someone on purpose." The only female member of the team curled her lips in disdain. "Don't insult my faith. Gods were real. Otherwise, how can you explain how the ancient people created so many great miracles, only for them to collapse and perish overnight? According to the oldest records, countless gigantic stars fell from the sky, causing the earth to crumble and the sea to surge with waves of thousands to tens of thousands of meters." The young man retorted with an indignant expression. Just as the woman was about to say something, a gigantic black shadow suddenly leapt out from the forest. Roar! In an instant, a monster that was twice the size of an elephant and covered in green scales appeared out of thin air. Before anyone could react, it snapped the young man in half at the waist with a bone-chilling snapping sound. "Damn it! It's the scale dragon. Everyone, prepare for battle. Disperse. Disperse. Do not fight it head-on. Prepare the flame powder." Following a series of heart-wrenching roars, the mercenaries quickly got into formation and clashed with the gigantic beast. None of them noticed that their employer had already left without a sound, completely ignoring their lives. Following the footsteps of a monster on the muddy ground, Zhang Cheng quickly found the legendary air raid shelter. As he expected, not only were there more than a dozen monsters resting at the entrance of the cave, but there were also people feeding them food, while the smaller ones were being trained by the breeder. "Ah, I caught your tail." Seeing this scene, Zhang Cheng slightly raised the corner of his mouth. His whole body suddenly became transparent and finally disappeared into the air. As a powerful spellcaster, Deceiving the eyes of mortals and beasts was a piece of cake for him. After entering the air raid shelter, he was surprised to find that in every small cave, a video was constantly playing. The abducted children were staring intently at the large LCD screen hanging on the wall. Their eyes were filled with fanatical worship, and from time to time, they would shout out words of praise. Brainwashing. This was the first word that popped up in Zhang Cheng's mind. There was actually a guy who was using the technology before the disaster to cultivate a large number of devout and fanatical believers. Could it be that God, who had been sleeping for thousands of years, could quickly understand the role of technology in a short time and apply it to his own belief system? In particular, the content played on the LCD screen did not mention a specific name from beginning to end. It only repeatedly emphasized that God was the only true God in the world, the master of the supreme thunder. If it were an ordinary person, it was likely that they would associate it with the famous third-generation god Zeus in ancient Greek mythology. However, Zhang Cheng felt that this was definitely not the work of the Olympian gods. This was because the bloodline of the Olympian gods originated from the legendary Titan god. They controlled a part of the original power of the world and did not need the faith of mortals at all. On the contrary, these guys regarded mortals as chess pieces and playthings. If they really woke up, they would not hesitate to show their greatness and then provoke a war between mortals in the name of God for fun. There was no doubt that this air raid shelter belonged to a god who relied on the faith and worship of mortals to obtain power. Moreover, the other party was extremely careful. From the beginning, he had adopted a method of isolation from the outside world to ensure that his spreading of faith would not cause even the slightest commotion and attention. What was more frightening was that this god did not even fully believe in his believers and was not even willing to tell them his real name. Chapter 970. How can I find this god who is secretly playing tricks? Looking at the thousands of children who had been completely brainwashed, Zhang Cheng touched his chin and fell into deep thought. Obviously, directly reading their memories was undoubtedly the stupidest idea. Not to mention how much time and effort it would take to do so. Whether he could find the answer was a big question mark. Because according to the other party's level of caution, he should not make such a low-level mistake. Just as he stayed invisible and thought about what to do next, a very familiar figure suddenly appeared at the other end of the air raid shelter. Intruder, report your name. The man covered in a black robe roared loudly. His voice was so loud and full of power that just a few syllables made the whole cave tremble slightly. You are Lafern? Zhang Cheng's eyes instantly saw through the disguise and saw the other party's true face. Lafern was undoubtedly very shocked that someone actually called out the name he had abandoned for hundreds of years. He took off his hood and revealed an extremely majestic face, especially his two eyes, which were constantly flashing with silver lightning. Needless to say, he had successfully refined his own divinity and officially got rid of the shackles of mortals, becoming a god of thunder who relied on faith to obtain power. It's really you. Long time no see, my dear old friend. Zhang Qing also removed the invisibility spell and opened his arms with a smile on his face. It had to be said that after wandering in the Earth's orbit for so long, now that he saw an old acquaintance, he actually felt a little gratified. As for how Lafern obtained enough divinity and divine power, he did not care at all. Anyway, no matter how the other party developed as believers, he would never be able to surpass those ancient gods born from the primordial world, let alone pose a threat to a powerful and almost invincible Titan. But unfortunately, Lafern did not know this. He looked up and down at Zhang Cheng with a look of disbelief. After a full minute, he said, "Unbelievable. I knew you must not be dead, but I didn't expect that you have also obtained power that is not inferior to the gods. Tell me, what is going on with your body and soul? Why do you give me a strong sense of oppression?" "Titan. I'm already a Titan now," Zhang Cheng explained straightforwardly. For Lafern, who had just become a new god, there was no need for him to be sneaky or hide anything, because as long as he wanted to, he could use a finger to crush the other party like a bug at any time. Titan? The Titan of ancient Greek mythology? Lafern's face was filled with shock. Zhang Cheng smiled and shook his head. No, it's another kind of Titan. To put it simply, my existence is equivalent to the energy of a planet. Do you still remember the terrible disaster that destroyed human civilization hundreds of years ago? I did it. Those monsters and invaders from the other world were also my doing. What? It's you. Lafren's pupils suddenly shrank, and a shocking silver lightning snake was released from his body. As one of the few people who still had intact memories of the past, he knew all too well how the asteroids that fell from the sky caused terrible damage to the planet and human civilization. It was not an exaggeration to describe it as extinction. Due to the violent impact of the asteroids, at least two-thirds of the life on Earth disappeared, and the terrain and landscape were permanently changed. As a typical conspiracy theorist, he had always thought that this should be a super magic released by the demons of hell to invade Earth. But now the truth was finally revealed. That's right. Don't you think the humans were too arrogant in the past? They had no fear at all. They were completely driven by endless instincts and desires. Look at them now. They have learned what fear is. Most importantly, I reshaped the entire world according to my ideas and permanently integrated magic and supernatural power into human genes. Maybe hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, but one day, these primitive and backward mortals will slowly build a brilliant and great mixed civilization. Zhang Cheng grinned, revealing a devilish smile. That's right, a devilish smile. He did not have the slightest bit of sympathy or pity for those who had died in the disaster. The reason was very simple. He had completely abandoned his human identity and no longer thought that the ordinary people who struggled to survive were his own kind. On the contrary, in Zhang Cheng's eyes, humans had long become something very similar to ants in the eyes of humans. Even if he killed hundreds of millions of them, he would not feel any guilt or regret. You're a lunatic. The craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. The most sick lunatic. Do you know what you've done? Lafren's hands were shaking uncontrollably, not knowing whether it was because of anger or something else. Ha ha. No, my friend. It's not me who's crazy, it's the world. Maybe you won't believe it, but I was just an ordinary person who couldn't be more ordinary, living a boring life every day. But suddenly one day my life changed. It became dangerous and full of intrigue and deceit. In order to survive, I lied, cheated, killed, destroyed, and destroyed. I've done the most despicable things you can think of, almost without exception. So, many people, including you, are responsible for my current situation. Zhang Cheng laughed unscrupulously and retorted mercilessly. The environment determined one's character, and character determined one's fate. This sentence was not said casually, but had a real impact on a person. You mean, we made you who you are now? Lafren narrowed his eyes, and there was a trace of sarcasm in his tone. Don't joke. From the first time we met, I could feel the vigorous ambition and desire in your heart. It was not others who made you crazy, but yourself. Well, I don't want to argue with you endlessly on this meaningless issue, because the fact has happened. No matter what we do, it can't be changed. Why don't we change the topic and talk about how you became a god? And what about Faust, who has always been with you? Don't tell me he's dead. If he, the spokesman of death, also died, that would be too interesting. Faust found a kingdom of the god of death and is waging a long war, intending to conquer it and become a real god of death. Wow, it seems that when I was away, you two really did a lot of things. Chapter 971. Some people said that reuniting with an old friend was something worth celebrating, but for Zhang Cheng and Lafren, it was the opposite. They were full of suspicion, tension, and hostility. Especially for Lafren, he always thought that Roland was an extremely crazy, dangerous, and ambitious guy. Zhang Cheng, on the other hand, thought that other than himself, everyone else was an NPC. They lived and died for him. Even the whole world was just a game. Those seemingly powerful enemies were like bosses in the game, destined to be the experience points of the legendary protagonist. In fact, he was already tired of the game, so he couldn't wait to end it all. Unfortunately, strength was not everything in this game. To be precise, the problem he urgently needed to solve now was more like solving a puzzle than crushing the enemy with great strength. After all, he couldn't just destroy the earth and wander aimlessly in the vast universe. After a long silence, Laffern finally opened his mouth and probed. "You didn't come here just to look for me, did you? Find you? No, you think too highly of yourself." Zhang Cheng chuckled and shook his head. "Gods like you, who have been contaminated by the beliefs of mortals, are destined to never reach the peak of power from the beginning. What I'm looking for are the ancient gods who obtained power from the planet itself." "You're looking for the ancient gods?" Laffern widened his eyes in surprise. "That's right. I believe that you, who have the blood of the descendants of gods, should know best that many ancient gods didn't really die. They were just forced to fall into a deep sleep for thousands of years. They only need an opportunity to wake up and appear in front of the world again. How about it? Are you interested in digging them out with me one by one?" Zhang Cheng made a meaningful invitation. Laffern's eyes kept flashing, as if he was thinking about the risks and benefits. Soon he smiled and asked, "What can I get from it?" "A lot. To be precise, except for some important information, everything else is yours." Zhang Cheng directly gave him an offer that he couldn't refuse. "Deal." Laffern agreed without any hesitation. He didn't even ask how he could fulfill his promise. The reason was extremely simple. He'd already sensed that this once weak young man before him had already grown to an extent that far exceeded his imagination, and there was utterly no need to lie or deceive him. "You made a wise choice. Believe me, in the future, you will be grateful for the decision you made today. Here, this is a magic communication device. If you have any news, write it down and burn it. Lastly, I'm glad to see that you're still alive. If it's Fongbin's Lake, please send my regards to Faust. Goodbye, dear old friend." As the last word left his mouth, Zhang Cheng turned around and disappeared at the end of the dark bomb shelter. Looking at his receding figure, Laffern touched his chin and muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "Looking for an ancient god that has fallen into a deep slumber? Looks like he's planning something. I need to inform Faust." After figuring out the master of the Hermit Order, Zhang Cheng once again lost all clues and goals. He began to wander aimlessly around the world as a traveler, searching for organizations that he thought were suspicious. But in the end, without exception, none of them had anything to do with the ancient gods. Most of them were schemers and ambitious people. Just as he was wondering if it was a mistake to summon the asteroid to destroy the Order, Adam sent him a trident forged from an unknown metal and divine power. "Don't tell me this is the weapon of the legendary Emperor Poseidon?" Zhang Cheng asked as he held the trident in his hand, feeling the immense power contained within. Without a doubt, this was a divine weapon. The person who held it could control seawater and easily destroy any coastal city or village. "Yes, master. Not only is it the weapon of Poseidon, it is also the key to opening one of the seals. And this seal is at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. It is also the remains of the destruction of ancient Atlantis." Adam replied calmly, "So my next stop is the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean?" Zhang Cheng's mouth twitched. It was only at this moment that he understood the true meaning of the phrase, "The evils of heaven can be forgiven, but the evils brought on by oneself are the hardest to bear." Due to the door of darkness, the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the Indian Ocean's deep waters were currently filled with terrifying beasts that were over 100 meters long, making them a forbidden zone for humans. Although these beasts couldn't pose too much of a threat to the Titans, they could greatly reduce the efficiency of the exploration. Originally, it would only take a few days, but now it would take at least a few months to a year or two. "Master, this is the sea region where I have analyzed the ancient Atlantis civilization based on the information I have gathered. You can use it as a reference." Adam took out the prepared information and placed it on the table. As an artificial life form, he looked no different from when he was just born. He was still as young and focused as ever, but there was a hint of vicissitudes in his eyes. "All right, I understand. Continue to look for the key to open the seal. Open one more, and those sleeping gods will awaken. By then, I'll be able to figure out what happened billions of years ago." After saying that, Zhang Cheng took the trident and jumped down from the cliff. With a splash, he plunged into the cold seawater and shuttled through the bottom of the sea at an extremely fast speed. For an entire week, he traversed the Arctic region and finally entered the Atlantic Ocean. He began to look for the legendary Atlantis ruins that had sunk to the bottom of the sea. Of course, it wasn't easy, especially under the harassment of the sea beasts from the foreign world. Any slight mistake would cause him to deviate from his original position. Coupled with the scarcity of fish and sea creatures at the bottom of the sea, he couldn't use the fish to explore the surrounding area in a large area. Therefore, he didn't find anything even after searching for 2 to 3 months. Moreover, the legend of Atlantis could be traced back to thousands of years ago. A large amount of silt and sediment had long covered the original appearance of the city. However, as the saying went, hard work pays off. In the 4th month, Zhangqing finally discovered a pyramid-shaped building about 150 kilometers away from a small island. However, like most ancient ruins, its main body had been completely buried under the silt. Moreover, there were large amounts of rusty bronze and pottery jars around it. Interesting. Looks like this is the Atlantis in Plato's records, the legendary city blessed by the sea emperor Poseidon. The corners of Zhangqing's mouth curled up slightly, revealing a delighted smile. Chapter 972. First, I need to let this city see the light of day again. Most of the time, Zhangqing did not mind using some unconventional methods. So after confirming that this was probably the place he was looking for, he directly cast a powerful spell and directly tore apart the Earth's crust within a radius of thousands of kilometers, causing the seabed to rise directly above sea level. As for whether this method would cause a terrifying tsunami, or if the sea level would rise substantially and directly drown a large number of rocky cities and villages, that was not a problem he was concerned about. Immediately after, he summoned tens of thousands of elemental life forms made entirely of silt and gravel, responsible for cleaning up and absorbing the filth that covered the buildings and streets. The whole process lasted 3 to 4 days. Finally, a city full of exotic scenery finally appeared in front of him. Huge temples, amphitheaters, arenas, public bathrooms, military camps, statues, stone pillars, reliefs, and murals. Everything was so dreamy, as if he had returned to the distant era of ancient Greek mythology overnight. In particular, the statue of Poseidon, the emperor of the sea, was in the middle of the city. It was lifelike, and the 2 sapphires inlaid in its eyes shone with a breathtaking brilliance. But what was interesting was that the hand of the statue was empty, and it was not holding the iconic trident of Poseidon. In an instant, Zhangqing seemed to have realized something, and stepped in front of the statue and inserted the trident into the right hand of the emperor of the sea. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, there was a loud noise. The ground that was originally paved with strips of stone suddenly split open, and then slowly separated from the middle, revealing a tunnel that led deeper underground. Looks like this is the seal. I just don't know what kind of monster is waiting for me inside. Zhangqing shrugged his shoulders and casually walked down the stairs. Soon, he saw a huge monster entrenched in the pool. Although the light was very dim, he could still see the appearance of the other party clearly. It was a sea monster with countless sea dragon heads, and only one of them retained the face of a woman, and an unbelievable amount of divinity flowed in its body. There was no doubt that this was a freak born from the union of 2 gods. If he guessed correctly, her name should be Charybdis, the daughter of the sea king Poseidon and the earth goddess Gaia, and one of the enemies that caused trouble for the hero Hercules in the epic Aeneid. However, perhaps because she had stayed in the seal for too long, her body and spirit had obviously entered a dormant period, and she did not realize that someone had broken in and was still sleeping soundly. Thousands of years did not make her weak at all. Instead, she had accumulated an astonishing amount of power. Good evening, madam. Zhangqing obviously did not intend to take the opportunity to sneak attack, and took the initiative to greet her. But it was a pity that Charybdis didn't show any signs of waking up and continued to lay on the ground. Seeing that the other party was unwilling to pay any attention to him, Zhang Cheng did not force the issue and headed straight for the seal. But at the moment he brushed past the monster's huge body, Charybdis suddenly opened its eyes, opened its bloody mouth, and pounced forward. Asterisk boom, boom, boom. Asterisk relying on her unparalleled size advantage. In a short moment, she broke at least 7 or 8 stone pillars and smashed several big holes in the wall. Hee hee, you are really as sinister and cunning as the rumors say. Zhang Cheng easily dodged the impact of the dragon head and laughed sarcastically. Obviously, this monster with divinity flowing in her body had been awake from the beginning and deliberately pretended to be asleep, waiting for an opportunity to launch a fatal blow. Who are you? Charybdis was undoubtedly not an irrational beast, and she narrowed her eyes and questioned loudly. No matter what, she was the child of the sea king Poseidon and the earth goddess Gaia. Poseidon was the 3rd generation of the main god of Olympus, and Gaia was one of the first gods. Sorry, I am in a hurry today, and I am not interested in talking too much nonsense with you. But out of respect for the lady, I have decided to give you a choice, submit or die. Zhang Cheng straightforwardly gave an ultimatum. To be honest, if it was Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, or Athena, he would not mind spending some time to talk to them and see if he could get some useful information. But what was Charybdis? The Olympian gods did not even recognize her as a god, and only regarded her as a banshee with the bloodline of the gods. The god king Zeus did not even have to use any effort to imprison her here like a watchdog for thousands of years. Who do you think you are? Go to hell. Charybdis was obviously enraged, and countless dragon heads opened their bloody mouths and spat out high-pressure water pillars, instantly swallowing everything around them. What was even more terrifying was that the water formed vortexes of various sizes at an extremely fast speed, constantly squeezing and colliding. Even the rocks could not hold on for more than a few seconds, and they would explode into countless smaller particles. As for flesh and blood, they would probably be torn into minced meat in an instant. But this kind of attack was not even an itch for Zhang Cheng. In order to deal with the huge monster, he directly transformed into a titan that was over 100 meters tall, smashed the terrifying magic vortex with a slap, and picked Charybdis up like a chicken, and teased with a playful expression, "Lady, it seems that you have made the wrong choice. In that case, let me send you on your way. Maybe in the not-too-distant future, we can meet again in the kingdom of the underworld king Hades." No! Accompanied by heart-wrenching screams and roars, Charybdis was directly stomped into a meat patty. The divine power and divinity contained in her body were not wasted, and they were all collected for a rainy day. With the guardian dead, it was naturally not difficult to break the seal. However, the instant the seal broke, Zhang Cheng clearly sensed a strong power filling up the entire planet. It was as if something was awakening. "Oomph, the creator? I see." A disdainful smile appeared on his face, and he turned to leave the city that had been buried at the bottom of the sea for many years. After he was completely gone, the land that rose from the bottom of the sea began to sink again and finally disappeared forever. Maybe one day in the future, when human civilization developed to a certain extent, they would discover this ancient city and launch a series of archaeological investigations and research. But now it was just a fragment forgotten by history, and it had no meaning at all. Chapter 973. In the endless void, the woman who called herself the Creator was sitting in front of a stone table. She stared at the man who looked very similar to Zhang Cheng with her starry eyes. After a full minute, she sighed and said, "It's been 2 million years. Ever since you left me on this desolate planet, you seem to have disappeared. Now you're finally willing to show yourself. 2 million years isn't long for people like you and me, is it? Moreover, I'm not here for you. I'm here for someone else. The organization is in urgent need of a master in energy and mysticism. Therefore, after discussion and voting, we've always thought that it's time to end this trial and accept him as one of us." The man gently touched the mysterious mecha on his body. His tone was full of anticipation. "Oomph, how do you know he can defeat me?" the Creator asked with a cold smile. The man smiled and shrugged. "It's simple. You should know that he's essentially the same as us. You can even say that he's a clone in a parallel universe. Moreover, in the 200 trials, the final winner has always been us. Moreover, do you think that you, who took half of the astral souls, can compare to him, who took 2 astral souls? Don't be naive. You're just a chess piece used to catalyze his growth and surpass himself. You plan to sacrifice me? The creator clenched her fists tightly and asked with gritted teeth. No, not sacrifice. I'm embracing fate. My dear, you should feel honored. Because of you, we've obtained a lunatic who completely embraces darkness and has no moral bottom line. In return, I'll let him wipe out all the consciousness in your soul after he kills you. Then, he'll banish you to a foreign world and start anew. Don't worry, we won't kill you. After saying this meaningful sentence, the man stood up. The dazzling engine on the mecha instantly transcended time, space, and distance, easily breaking free of the endless void. The woman who called herself the creator saw this scene and clenched her fists tightly. She muttered to herself in a voice that only she could hear. You want my life? Not so easy. You don't understand how much preparation I've done in the past 2 million years. If the situation really reaches that stage, I won't hesitate to detonate the entire planet or even the entire galaxy to ruin your plan. No one can ignore me. You can't treat me as a tool that you can discard after using me. At the same time, Zhang Cheng, who had just returned to the western continent of North America from the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, was surprised to find that 2 moving light spots suddenly appeared on the ancient parchment that had been following him. After experimenting for a while, he recognized that one of the light spots was him, and the other one was moving towards him at an extremely fast speed. Before he could react to what had happened, he saw a ray of blue light streaking across the sky. Then, with a loud boom, it crashed into the ground, creating a 20-meter deep crater. Boom! Gravel and mud flew in all directions. When the smoke dissipated, a man who looked 90% similar to himself, wearing a pure black mecha, slowly walked out from inside. His face was brimming with a warm smile as he gently waved his hand. Yo, who are you? Zhang Cheng narrowed his eyes and subconsciously raised his vigilance to the highest level. This was because he could clearly feel that there was a terrifying energy source hidden inside the seemingly gorgeous mecha. It was not much worse than his own titan. In fact, it might even be stronger. Of course, the most important thing was the indescribable sense of familiarity between the two of them. It was like looking at a reflection in a mirror. Ha ha, you've already felt it, haven't you? The man laughed and opened his arms. That's right, I am you, and you are me. We are different projections of the same consciousness in countless parallel spaces. You can also understand it as another version of yourself in a parallel universe. So, you were the one who brought this thing to hell back then. Zhang Cheng took out the black metal ball he had obtained from Satan's tomb from his pocket. Yes, the full name of this thing is the high-energy antimatter obliterator. It can instantly decompose all matter into the most primitive particle state through biological energy. How is it? Are you satisfied with its power? The man raised the corner of his mouth, revealing a hint of pride. Zhang Cheng shook his head lightly. I don't know. To be exact, I've never used it before. Also, can I trouble you to explain to me what exactly is going on with everything I've experienced? Please don't tell me that you're not the mastermind behind all this. I don't deny this point. In fact, I'm here this time to talk to you about the organization and the trial. The man had no intention of avoiding the topic and openly admitted it. Since that's the case, let's find a place to sit down, have a drink, and talk. After saying that, Zhang Cheng took the initiative to lead the way to the nearest town. The man who looked very similar to him followed closely behind. Not long after, the two of them walked into a small, shabby tavern that was still open for business. With the ability to invade minds and control minds, Zhang Cheng easily chased everyone out, including the owner. He opened a wooden wine barrel and slowly poured 2 glasses for himself and the other party. Neither of them had the intention to speak first. They both raised their glasses to greet each other, then raised their heads and downed the wine in one gulp, allowing the sour and sweet taste of the wine to stimulate their taste buds. About 2 to 3 minutes later, the man took the initiative to introduce himself. My name is Chen Lu. You can also call me Old Chen. In fact, I'm the same as you. I've already achieved a certain level of immortality. The only difference is that you're using mysticism while I'm using technology. Just like the saying goes, whether it's technology or magic, once developed to a certain level, there's not much of a difference in essence. I understand that you must have a lot of questions in your heart. Take this opportunity to ask. I'm willing to answer them in detail. First of all, what's with the organization you mentioned just now? Secondly, why do we choose me? Lastly, and most importantly, what's your goal? Zhangqing pondered for a moment and immediately raised the 3 questions he was most concerned about. Obviously, judging from the other party's attitude, what he had experienced could be classified as a trial. In other words, this unbelievably powerful organization used a series of methods to select the appropriate talents to expand itself. Chapter 974. The organization, as the name suggests, is an organization formed by countless like-minded people. You might not believe it, but until now, the organization has conducted more than 200 trials. Without exception, the final winner has always been us. Simply put, from the founder to the next member, they're all our clones in the various parallel universes. How is it? Unbelievable, isn't it? The guy who called himself Old Chun cracked a playful smile. Zhang Cheng raised his eyebrows in disbelief. You mean, in the entire organization, more than 200 members all look very similar to you and me, or even exactly the same? Yes. Do you know how crazy that is? Many times, if I don't use the assistant system, I can't even tell who is who. Old Chin shook his head with emotion. But the good thing is that we have a strong sense of identity with each other. At the same time, we are also incomparably united. When necessary, we are willing to sacrifice for each other. After all, we have a closer connection with each other than bloodline. Then what's a trial about? Zhang Cheng frowned and continued to ask. The trial, as the name suggests, is a way to recruit qualified members. Simply put, we will artificially interfere with the progress of Earth in a certain parallel universe, causing it to deviate from its original history and create an environment at a certain time. For example, when I was undergoing the trial, the Earth I was in was a highly technologically advanced world. Not only did humans become the overlords of the Milky Way, they also launched a war and invaded the nearby Andromeda Galaxy. Because the organization needed to build a powerful space fleet, I successfully passed the trial and joined the organization as a member. Now, the organization needs a master of energy and mysticism, so you were chosen. Old Chun answered as he scooped up a large cup of red liquid from the wine barrel and continued to gulp it down. He did not mind that the brewing technology was extremely primitive and backward, causing the wine to taste very sour and astringent. I see. Zhangqing nodded thoughtfully. No wonder I kept feeling that something was wrong. It turns out that you guys have modified this planet. Hee. It's not just modification. We have turned this planet into your food. As you continue to devour, you will become stronger and stronger. In the end, you will reach or even exceed our expectations. As for the last question, the highest goal of the entire organization, I can't give you an answer for the time being. Even though I personally feel that you won't have much of a problem defeating that woman. But no matter what, rules are rules. As long as you don't pass the final test, I can't tell you the organization's goal. Believe me, you'll be shocked when you hear it. When Senior Chen said this, his eyes were filled with excitement and fanaticism, like a lunatic who was not in his right mind. Of course, to Zhang Cheng, this kind of gaze was not unfamiliar to him because sometimes he would also become like this, so he rubbed his chin and fell into deep thought. Judging from the other party's strange mech, which had advanced technology to the extreme and was not much worse than the Titan, he could more or less determine how terrifying the strength of the so-called organization was. Not to mention, there was also a founder who had been popular for who knew how many years. In the universe where Azeroth was located, there were only a few Titans added together. Among them, Azeroth's astral soul was known as the one with the most potential. But the organization had more than 200 individuals who were comparable to Zhang Cheng, or even stronger than him. This amazing strength was probably enough to conquer the entire universe. What did they want to do? Why were they still tirelessly recruiting new people when they were so powerful? The more he thought about it, the more Zhang Cheng felt that the organization's goal must be far beyond the scope of his understanding. However, he was not in a hurry to get an answer. He crossed his hands and supported his chin. His eyes were empty and deep. When Senior Chen saw this, he smiled and comforted him. Relax, there's no need to be so nervous. I believe that with the knowledge and power you have, it should be more than enough to deal with her. After all, a long, long time ago, she was betrayed by the god she created. Not only was her power sealed, but her consciousness was also expelled into the distorted void. She never had the chance to go further. No, I think you've misunderstood the god. I'm not worried about that woman who calls herself the creator. Instead, I'm worried about how to quickly undo all of the seals, release her, and then completely destroy her. Zhang Cheng explained with a helpless expression. Sorry, I'm afraid I can't help you with this. Because the organization has strict rules, before you officially pass the trial, I can't interfere in any way, let alone give you the slightest bit of help. Fortunately, for us, time has never been a problem. It may be decades or centuries. In short, we'll patiently wait for you to complete the trial. Well, today's conversation ends here. I still have a lot of things to deal with. You can slowly enjoy the last of your leisurely life. Once you become a member of the organization, I'm afraid you won't have the chance to enjoy the beautiful holidays anymore. As soon as he finished speaking, Old Chin stood up and walked out of the tavern. Immediately after, he soared into the air and broke through the atmosphere at a speed that was difficult to be seen with the naked eye. He drew a dazzling white trajectory in the outer sky and then directly broke the bindings of time and space. He entered a passage that looked like a wormhole and finally disappeared without a trace. Zhang Cheng raised his head and stared at the singularity that was rapidly returning to its original state. His eyes revealed a fiery glow as he muttered to himself, "Incredible! You can actually use the means of technology to exceed the speed of light by thousands of times in a short period of time. With pure speed and kinetic energy, you can enter the distorted space and time." As a titan who had outstanding achievements in the fields of energy, magic, alchemy, mysticism, and so on, he was still unable to make himself move faster than the speed of light. From this, it could be seen how difficult it was, not to mention the technological means. According to Einstein's point of view in the special theory of relativity, it was impossible for matter in the world, or even a universe, to exceed the speed of light. This was because once the speed of light was exceeded, it would theoretically form a terrifying black hole, producing an infinite gravitational force that would firmly attract all the materials around it. Although an Italian physicist later claimed to have discovered a type of superluminal neutrino in another experiment, it was later confirmed that it was just an erroneous data. This also meant that until now, in the technology that Zhang Cheng understood, there was no civilization that could prove that there was matter that could move faster than the speed of light. But now, this common sense had been broken by a man wearing a black power mech who looked 90% similar to himself.